Once upon a time on Earth, a tree with a golden glow took root. He was given the name Yggdrasil, and at one moment it grew greatly to unprecedented sizes and embraced all living things around it. And then it created a new world that was based on different game genres. Thanks to Yggdrasil, a world called the Labyrinth was created, which was fraught with many different mysteries and secrets. The people of this world called it in their own way, namely the Game of God, although not everyone could become a player in it. After all, there were also ordinary hard workers who worked hard, and at that moment they were warned through a bullhorn that if they again took anything without asking, they would be immediately fired. Not all employees liked this statement. Instead of nicknames, everyone had their own number, and one of the workers, after finishing work, came up to 7,017 and said that he had worked hard that day. He also added that they had not had nice things for a long time, so he offered him to buy this thing at a very good price, namely this tiny data transmitter. But the worker immediately warned that it was not made from real data, and there was a small risk that it could be detected. But this did not mean that it was less effective. But this was not of interest to 7,017, and he simply pushed the worker and left without having said the words, which was very disappointing to him, but he still understood that this guy was just an unknown newcomer. They often told him in his back that he was exactly the same as everyone else. Usually, after work, 7,017 walked the streets of this unusual city, which were full of homeless people who did nothing but ask for food. Here's a guy approaching a random box store, opening the door, of which one could hear the dissatisfaction of visitors with words that their points should be returned to them. Inside, people spent time playing slot machines in hopes of winning prizes. The guy came there to also play, because this miracle machine gave out everything that existed in that world. Her name was Radnom Box. After the guy approached her, she greeted him and recognized him as an unknown player. 7,017 knew that legal games attracted people because with their help you could get rich quickly. That's why he decided to try his luck. He came across a chance to drop an SS rank account creation card. After being asked if he wanted to spin the 10, the guy immediately decisively said that he was ready because this was his only hope. With ringing music and bright animation, the prize began to fall out in front of him. The item was N-rank toothbrush, and since the guy was not interested in it at all, he simply continued further. Time passed, and the unnecessary objects that he knocked out filled the space behind him more and more. He failed time after time as N-rank items kept falling out. After a while, he managed to win even an R-level prize. But he still didn't care because he would only be happy to receive an SR or SSR rank item. The guy couldn't even remember how many times he had already tried his luck, but he still hoped to knock out that very rare item. What was just before his eyes was his mother, for the sake of which he tried everything to knock out this object. Suddenly, for a second, his eyes froze from incomprehensible sparks, all because a very bright light began to emanate from the screen of the random box. He could not even think that the same SR object could be in front of him. After all, the chance of falling out was 1 in a million. That's exactly how colorful the box with that coveted SSR prize looked. The guy was shocked that it was SSR in front of him, because at first it seemed to him that in front of him was an SR rare item. Previously, he thought that he would never have been so lucky, since it was difficult for him to imagine such a miracle even in his dreams. And yet, thanks to his tenacity and perseverance to solve the matter to the end, he was generously rewarded. A card that allowed you to create an account. In the magical labyrinth Yggdrasil, that's where he could use it. And there was only one way for him to gain access to that place. This is to use your game account avatar to get into another reality. An avatar was a virtual body that never appeared in the real world, but this method was the only way to transport objects from the labyrinth to the outside world. And objects of the virtual world that go beyond its reality are what changed their world, after which the shuttle service became completely dependent on Yggdrasil. And the players leading his era were important representatives of society. But this qualification was not given to everyone, but only to a limited number of people. Therefore, the guy ran as fast as he could with joy. After all, he managed to get the opportunity to become a player, and now he could start all over again. All he had to do was register his account in the central zone. Suddenly, while he was about to do this, he woke up on the ground. He didn't understand what happened and why he was lying there. And at that moment, there were still sounds that some people were asking their boss if this was the guy. The boss said that this was exactly who they needed, because in front of them was the lucky one who pulled out an SSR item. But his people believed that maybe the guy was unlucky after all, because they managed to catch him. One of the jocks said that it was indeed the one who was able to create the account, and he thought it was a good catch for the evening. The boss himself was surprised because previously he had only seen this in lists, but now he was glad because the card became his, and now he could accomplish what he had long wanted. Suddenly, the guy at his feet uttered words in which he demanded the return of his card. The boss told this stranger that he was a liar and this card did not belong to him, and then he asked his guys to do their job. And even at such a difficult moment for the guy, he still continued to demand the return of what belonged to him. But the boss's people were completely lenient towards him and never gave the desired answer to this guy. But this did not stop him from continuing to demand and stand his ground. At that time, the boss's guards wondered, was this kid really planning to start a new life? The boss told him that if he bought something from someone else's store, he should pay a commission. Placing his finger on the guy's forehead, he sharply began to give out a magical impulse, after which he added that he had made an honest deal with the guy. And for the fact that he took the card, he had to transfer 30,000 points to this guy's account. And then the guy was doomed because he understood that this thing could only be knocked out once. The boss said that the transfer of funds was completed, and since the guy accepted it, from that moment on he could do what he wanted. After that, the guy decided to lie down for a while. At that moment, in the background I heard these people who did not understand what had happened with the weather, and were also deciding the moment with a festive banquet in honor of receiving a valuable item. Suddenly, for a second, the guy moved his hand. Then the jock noticed something else and told his boss about it. He reported that this guy still hasn't learned his lesson. The boss was most surprised that he was able to get up at all after this. At that moment, the guy received a warning that his vital signs had decreased, so he should quickly visit the nearest medical facility. But he ignored it and only continued to look at those violators who had thus exchanged his item. Watching this, the boss did not understand why this fool behaved this way. Perhaps it was not enough for him. But suddenly, the guy turned away from them and began to go to the random box store, which greatly surprised the boss and his employees. They suspected that he was once again planning to knock out an SSR rarity item, which was impossible. They shouted to him in the back that they wanted to make another deal if he knocked out another card. The jock was wondering what they would do if something happened to that guy. But the boss believed that nothing would happen to them for this, because the guy was not an influential person. Meanwhile, there was still a sign in front of him that said his vital signs were low. At that moment, he really didn't feel very well, to put it mildly. Walking to the store, he felt dizzy and all the people around seemed to blur. But no matter what, he was still going to take what was his. As soon as the machine gun greeted him, an awkward moment happened, because the guy was knocked off his feet. However, his hand still continued to reach for the start button. He pressed the gacha button over and over again to do it again. But then he became disheartened when he saw more and more unnecessary objects in front of him. There was still a warning in front of his face about low indicators that did not lead to good. Suddenly, the boss was covered by a bright flash of light that came from the Yggdrasil tree, which surprised him because he did not understand what was happening. Due to the emergency situation and the critical condition of the owner, extreme life-saving measures were taken, and then the forced transformation of characters began, after which the system asked to enter the character's name. The guy found himself in pitch darkness and stood as if he were before a court, which surprised him. He did not understand why he was handcuffed, because there were no crimes on his part. Then a voice from the darkness said that he was expelled from the guild for leaking confidential information. He was angry and began to make excuses, saying that this could not happen and that they had confused him with someone else. But from the darkness they only heard the words that the court had found him guilty, so they wanted to deprive him of such a legendary title. Suddenly, the guy noticed that something was wrong with his voice. The two ghosts who appeared congratulated him and said that this was only the beginning of his unknown life. The guy thought it was unfair and wanted to challenge this decision because he didn't do it. All he could think about was that he should have earned enough money to pay for his mother's operation. Suddenly, a voice from the darkness told 7017 that it was time for him to wake up. In the blink of an eye, the guy suddenly moved through time. He didn't understand what was such a bright and at the same time wet place in front of him. 7017 considered it some kind of fantasy, and still didn't understand how he got there in the first place. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, which scared the guy. Nevertheless, it asked him to enter the name of his character. The guy was stunned to see this thing flying, and he assumed that it was a robot vacuum cleaner. What was wrong, and she considered it a rude statement in her direction, she said that she was Yuguan's random box system, after which she congratulated the guy on becoming her master. After all, 7017 was the only one in the world who was able to obtain the UR rank. Hearing this, he was shocked, because previously the guy thought that the rarities of gacha were limited only to the ranks N, R, SR, and SRR. But as it turned out, this was completely wrong, and he was the only one who found out. The system reported that at the moment he was between reality and the world of Yggdrasil, and the reason she needed the master's name was to complete the registration and gain access to the labyrinth. The guy knew that to register he needed an avatar created using a game account, and that this limit of human technology had nothing to do with him. The system said that due to being a master in a critical condition, she had to use her power to help. And now he was in a state where his body had been voluntarily transformed to access Yggdrasil. So she again asked her master to enter her character's name. The guy still couldn't figure out if it was a dream or if it was all really happening. But no matter what, he realized that this was his chance. He finally entered his name, which sounded like Ryuki, after which the setup was completed, and a bright glow appeared in front of him again. Then, the system notified that they were going into the labyrinth. When access was opened, Ryuki saw that same labyrinth with his own eyes for the first time, the expanses of which were extraordinarily beautiful and were called a fantasy world. For the first time in a long time, the guy felt a pleasant breeze on his hair, and also solid ground under your feet. He was incredibly happy, because the simulations on the monitor that he saw could never compare with this landscape. Immediately after such a pleasant moment, the guy noticed how a bunch of ghostly skeletons were moving towards him. Ryuki certainly didn't think that upon arrival in the new world he would be greeted like this. He began to run, because what other options could an untrained guy have? And he considered it an ugly act on the part of the system to throw him onto the battlefield like that. Skeletons were of the first level. They meant undead creatures whose body no longer existed, but anger seeped into their bone marrow. But they were still weak to physical attacks. Nevertheless, for Ryuki it was a disaster, and the guy began to call for a status window, which appeared and asked the master not to upset him, because it was too shameful. Ryuki wanted to know about the weapon because he believed that it should have come with him when he became a player. The system reported that the master was not a specific player of the labyrinth, so his other systems, including this one, were not applicable to him. In other words, the guy simply could not get his level, status, and much more from the fantasy world. Having learned about this, the guy did not understand why everything worked so strangely. The system said that this labyrinth was on a completely different level, and here you had to spin a random box to get something. Having entered the Yuguan system, the guy read the rules, which stated that if you log into it every day for a week, you will be given one SR level ticket. She also reported that in the fantasy world, the speed of issuing items has been increased. Of the achievements of UR Yuguan, there was one completed for which he was entitled to a reward in the form of a ticket to the labyrinth. And among the accessories, there was a reward of 5 tickets. And just for completing this registration, the guy received as many as 105 tickets, so he immediately began to use everything to increase the chances of getting something rarer. He really wanted to believe that the weapon would fall, because behind him was an army of skeletons. Suddenly, a bright object appeared in his hands. Delighted, Ryuki stopped and told the skeletons to attack. He hoped that their bones would be used for broth as ramen. But suddenly, one of the skeletons easily broke his object, which was obvious, because he had an N-rank toilet brush in his hands. The guy was so carried away that he didn't even look at the item that fell out to him, and was upset by such a setup from random boxes. He blamed the system for everything, because it was its fault that there were so many unnecessary items in the boxes. But the system was only surprised in response. It itself did not understand how, being at UR rank, it was possible to pull this off. She considered him a failure. While running away from enemies, the guy still continued to open random boxes, and he again received a strange item in the form of an N-rank wig. By the way, this was a good way to hide your bald spot. And while Ryuki was focused on the loss of a valuable item, the system could not help but warn him that he should watch his step. Unfortunately, she said this a little late, and the guy was slightly hurt. Meanwhile, ghostly skeletons had already managed to overtake him, which almost made him happy. Unexpectedly for him, the box next to him began to emit a bright glow. This was exactly what he needed, an R-level short sword, with which the guy immediately began to defend himself. After so many attempts, he was glad that he finally got something normal. Now he was no longer going to run away, but immediately got down to business. Ryuki was more than confident that he could defeat everyone without having any experience in sword fighting. But the attacking skeleton didn't think so when it pierced his shoulder, which surprised the guy, because he thought it should have worked. He understood that the skeleton's health was worth killing in just 2 blows, But the strength of the short sword was not enough for that. The system decided to remind him that the master could not use the labyrinth system, and such a combat ability, like health, was no exception. The guy was becoming more and more disappointed in the system because it had already said everything at the wrong time. He didn't understand how, given such a wonderful chance in his life, he could end his journey like this. These thoughts did not encourage him. On the contrary, they only motivated him to win. Even the fact that he was driven into a corner could not stop him. Therefore, he repelled the attack and was determined to deal with everyone. Suddenly, something surprised him very much, namely, that a bright radiance appeared behind him, which was a skill. And then Ryuki realized that with the randomness of the boxes, skills could also drop out. But he was confused by the fact that they did not exist in the fantasy world. He received Parry SR, a rank that could be used to parry attacks. And the swordsmanship skill was SR, a rank that meant that by equipping the skill, one could master swordsmanship. The system is always on time. She said that this random Yuguan box was not subject to any system restrictions. In other words, even skills could fall out. Then the guy thought that he could be lucky because anything could happen. This was his first time using the sword parry skill. A wig fell off the skeleton, which he was so worried about that he tried to catch it. But he no longer needed this, since Ryuki sawed him in two with his attack. And this, by the way, was precisely with the help of the sword mastery skill. The guy was stunned that he was the one who could freely use skills that were not in the existence of the labyrinth system, because he was allowed to ignore its laws and restrictions. For the first time, the system praised him and said that this was exactly what the balance of Yggdrasil looked like. She was surprised and said that she did not doubt him from the very beginning. After all, he was the person who managed to obtain the UR rank. She also said that he managed to receive an SSR rank item on the first day. Now a smile finally appeared on Ryuki's face, because luck was on his side. Therefore, he no longer worried that another mistake could happen at that moment. Meanwhile, behind him, there were already several skeletons attacking him. Turning around, Ryuki decided to take the chance of a new item and defeat everyone in one blow. It was World of Phantasm for short, WAP. Where was the masterpiece of the gaming industry from the game production company Ratira? The goal of which was for absolutely every player to take first place in the labyrinth. At this moment, Ryuki was still fighting the skeletons, and then a magical core fell out of one of them, which, by the way, was not immediately noticed by the guy. And having already defeated everyone, he began to be content with his first victory. The system reported that there were 7 killed skeletons, of which as many as 5 magic cores fell. And also that the experience points earned were converted into RP, which meant random box points. The guy didn't quite understand how it worked, and then the system said that they were used instead of experience, since the master did not yet have a level system. Having counted, the guy was surprised because for one skeleton they gave 150 RP, and he destroyed as many as 15 of them. Then the guy remembered that he had the last box left, from which the SSR level card fell out. Each time Ryuki was more and more surprised, and then the system became curious whether the master still could not believe in this reality. After all, if it was so much for him, then he was unworthy of such a reward. Ryuki said that he wanted this box to be closed for a while, which surprised the system, and she wanted to know why he decided that. At that moment, the guy thought about the fact that he could destroy his guild with such power, and until then, he decided to keep this power a secret. A system edition was released that offered him to increase his sword skill by using his 700 RP for this. The effect of this activates when he reflects an enemy attack. The rest of the guy's skills were at the entry level. Since Ryuki had 700 RP skill points left, he thought that he could take a detour to meet the skeletons again. And he was right, since there were twice as many of them there as last time. This time he was glad to see them because he wanted to quickly upgrade his skills. Time was of the essence for this guy when it came to fighting. This time he really got the hang of it in battle, because from the outside it looked terrifying. During this time, the system reported that it was the 3rd day of logging into WAP. He managed to complete many missions, such as defeating 10 monsters, performing a gacha spin, and receiving 10 items dropped from monsters, for which he received tickets from all missions. He realized that time in the labyrinth passed 10 times faster than in reality, and it was only 7 hours during which he managed to get 1,500 RP, which he considered a pretty good result. The system was pleasantly surprised because the master managed to get 10 gachas in a row at the training ground. And all this time she was buzzing like a robot vacuum cleaner that he had got the gacha. At that time, Ryuki was already thinking about the fact that he needed to increase the level of sword skills, and parrying should also be increased. Suddenly, the system cried out in surprise from a lack of understanding of what the master was doing. She simply couldn't believe that he would spend his precious RP on some skills, to which the guy replied that the skill system was also his ability. Afterwards, he became curious. What was the probability of the appearance of ranks? And then the system gave the following indicators. Rank N, 70%, rank R, 27%, SSR, rank 2 and 7%, and SSR, just 0.3%. Suddenly, Ryuki started complaining by showing the results of all his tickets that he had received recently as a reward, and they sucked. But the system only asked the question, did he manage to win SR and SSR with the first tickets? The system began to ask its master to give her the points that the guy had earned so hard because she needed them more than tickets. The guy only replied that there were enough tickets to open a new box. The system then asked how long he planned to stay in this forest. After all, since the area was a training area, the quality of the monsters killed was low. The guy replied that he needed a weapon, and his skill levels were not sufficiently upgraded, and he was proud that he knew more about WAP than anyone else. Therefore, Ryuki believed that he should have used all his information to level up in the forest, since there were opponents corresponding to him there. But there were also disadvantages because this zone was one way, into which the guy could not return if he left the forest. He was curious to see how far he would progress without adjusting his level and status, and he also mentioned that he would be able to get an SR rank ticket for a more serious mission. After some time, the guy received a 7th day bonus for entering in the form of 1 Yuguan SR ticket. Ryuki wanted to finally level up, so he found another skeleton and defeated it. By that time, his skills were as follows. Sword control had increased to the 3rd level. Parrying was exactly the same as breaking through an attack. But the temporary improvement in reflexes was only at the 2nd level. Ryuki believed that this was the limit of the skill that he could achieve there, so he thought about proceeding to the next stage. The system reminded him that it was time to open a new random box, with which the guy agreed. Still, he believed that it was just his luck, and he hoped that when SR was confirmed, some ordinary thing would not happen to him. When opened, the box sparkled so brightly that its light filled the entire space. Ryuki assumed that in front of him was something incredible, which could be called a WAP pickup truck. He got an SR-level sword pistol. The type of such weapon was bayonet. And in the guy's opinion, it completely destroyed the worldview of this game. He immediately began putting it into action to see the power it was capable of. As it turned out, with one swing, it was capable of destroying a tree whose trunk was huge. Even if we take into account his skill, the guy considered the weapon quite powerful, and he really liked the fact that the blade was long, because it was difficult to fight in the past. Suddenly, he was very interested in the question, what would happen if he died there? If he transforms his body, will anything happen to him in real life? The system replied that if something happened to the master, he could be revived using a backup copy of Yggdrasil. However, she warned in advance that this process was very painful. Hearing this, the guy was happy, and this so-called process did not frighten him at all. After that, he said that he wanted a gacha for all the remaining tickets, as he wanted to improve his combat power. This time he got something that could be used. It was a set of R-grade leather armor. Suddenly, Ryuki decided to ask because the system skipped his training and immediately threw him into hunting. In its justification, the system said that it was a training platform. And although she made a mistake with the coordinates, she sent it to the system, which the guy considered fair, and since he was already more advanced, he asked the system to record all his gaming achievements from that moment on. She wondered if he had the desired name for the files. Then the guy said to call it, The Story of the Escape of a No-Name from the Depths of the Sea. But he wondered, what was the purpose of the first video? After all, Yggdrasil created a labyrinth more refined than the originals of which he absorbed. Although most of the Razzia games were mass-produced and were full of all sorts of nonsense. And they talked that it was a worthy job concerning this place. While walking, the guy remembered something. Namely, the boss of the second half of the game could appear in an early area, which is exactly what happened, and this giant appeared right in front of the guy. The system reported information about the enemy. It said that in front of him was the Dark Knight of Chaos. After he received the blessing of the demonic god of chaos, he was expecting the strongest opponents in his tower. The system gave the guy a mission in which he had to kill this ghost of the Dark Knight, as a reward for which he could get 10 Yuguan tickets and 1 Yuguan SR rank ticket. This was unexpected for Ryuki, but he even liked it, because the experiment began from that moment. Suddenly, the demon knight introduced himself in a menacing voice and said that he was looking forward to a strong man, after which he attacked the guy because he was interested in what he was capable of. Thanks to such an unusual blade, the guy managed to resist such a strong opponent. Then he remembered that he had a parry ability that was already at the 3rd level. Then he confirmed his theory that if you successfully parry the blows, you could ignore the difference in attack power and level. And although he had such an unusual blade and abilities, even with such skills it was difficult. After all, this was not enough. Since this was his first meeting with such a majestic boss, he didn't understand why his attack didn't work. After all, it seemed to him that he was able to do this if the system did not influence him, and then he began to think about how it was possible to break through his defense. The system noticed that this was an excellent guess because the master could ignore the correction of the WAP system. The guy was confused because he believed that this could not be effective. Satima suddenly became furious and began to tell the guy that he was stupid, and then asked him to think a little about the idea that overtook the master. Ryuki wondered if his blade could compete with metal armor. Then a thought struck him. He realized that he had made a mistake by thinking only about the strategic moments of the game. When he was once again attacked by the ghost of the Dark Knight, he realized that the labyrinth was a world created for a game motive, and that the system would have affected an ordinary player but not him because he was different. While fighting, he still wondered what if these guesses were correct. Then he should have aimed at hard-to-reach points that were the weakest. Having realized that this guy was up to something wrong, the Dark Knight began to attack even harder. The guy only had to reflect this strong blow. Suddenly, due to the crossing of blades, a spark was formed which gave the same fuse to the additional feature of the guy's weapon, with the help of which he attacked the ghostly Dark Knight, which was one of the strongest blows during this battle. Who deprived the ghostly Dark Knight of his limbs? Having suffered, he could only sob proudly. The guy knew that in the labyrinth health was the system. In other words, being a Yuguan player, the guy wouldn't say that it was it, because damage could be caused to the enemy himself. And if he aims at vital points, then he could not only wound the ghostly knight, but also defeat him with one blow, if he had more strength. The system warned the guy that it was dangerous, after which something stuck into him. He was not ready for this because the guy did not expect that the Dark Knight could have long-range attacks. Turning around, he noticed that an ominous energy was emanating from his limb, the same one that pierced him. Here the Dark Knight said that demons were ferocious creatures that posed a threat to God. After which he wanted the guy to taste his despair. Dark matter began to emerge from his wound and from his limb, which surrounded the guy on all sides. Due to not knowing how to deal with dark magic, the guy only had to dodge. It was then that the guy realized that this was a bad idea, because the Dark Knight was the boss of the second half of the game, and it was impossible to defeat him during the training. Moreover, if you die in that place, it will be impossible to return. After all, even if the player's level increases, he still cannot return, which means he could not win. Moreover, no one has ever seen the second phase of the Dark Knight. At this time, he had too many attacks to parry. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the system realized that its master was in danger. After all, the Black Knight pierced him with his dark matter. Screaming and hitting the table with his palm, Ryuki couldn't believe it. He talked about how again someone rejected his strategic plan, and he couldn't understand what the problem was that time, because he was an expert analyst of the Lindsay Guild. The director then looked at the strategy manual he provided, but he knew that Rinell had previously rejected it, to which the guy replied that it was much more effective than before, so he wanted it to be accepted. Throwing him the strategy guide he had provided, the boss told him that he was not even a player, but an ordinary ranked person, so he should have come up with something better. Ryuki realized that the recapture did not suit his boss, and then he accepted the fact that this was the will of the ace of their guild. But he suddenly became angry because he was sure that the boss would not refuse Renell. And then he decided to throw out his anger through his fist beating on the table. After all, he could not understand how it could be that there would be no recapture. And then he realized that he should no longer obey Renell in everything. First of all, he was going to calm down because he needed to earn money for his mother's operation. So he began to correct the management records, believing that the guild would promote him for this. Suddenly, someone crept up behind him and whispered his name. This girl scared him, but she didn't want it at all because she just brought him coffee because she thought that this was what his tired look needed. This girl's name was Cynthia. She was a researcher at the Lindsay Guild. The guy was very grateful to her for her care. The girl noticed that he was editing the manual, which was rejected several times. Cynthia believed that he paid too much attention to him, which worried her, because she was worried about him. and she really wanted to help with this, but before that she asked if he was against it. Delighted, Ryuki showed the last part of the strategic manual, but since it was very secret, she had to inform her superiors about it and request materials for the required part, which the girl didn't mind doing because she had a desire to help him. She was even glad because it was a good reason for communication. The guy asked his mother not to be surprised because she had finally been given a date for the operation. She was surprised because she didn't understand where the funds for this came from. Ryuki replied that she did not need to worry about it because at that time his strategic plan was accepted. Hearing this, his mother was very happy. The guy said that it was all thanks to Cynthia, after which they hugged and his mother told him that she was incredibly proud of him. Ryuki told her not to worry about anything anymore because their efforts were rewarded. Previously, the guy was told that he was being fired for a crime related to the disclosure of top-secret guild information, which is why he was fired from Lindsay. The guy was surprised and did not fully understand what they meant, but his superiors told him that all the evidence was collected despite the fact that he acted very cunningly, and if Cynthia had not reported this, no one would have noticed. Hearing her name, the guy was very surprised because this girl wanted to help him. Suddenly, one of the people expressed his dissatisfaction with this meeting because he did not understand why they were wasting time on this. This was the same Rinell Darius who was the deputy of the Lindsay Guild. He didn't think that at this meeting he would have to meet with Ryuk, who constantly published guides that irritated him wildly. After all, Rinell always wondered who this fool was, since he almost went crazy when he saw the last publication. Afterwards, Rinell told Cynthia that it would be inappropriate for her to communicate with such a guy. And he also added that, as he had promised earlier, he would be his support, after which he invited the girl to celebrate this matter. Approaching Ryuk, Rinell said that he did not understand the essence of his work at all. But if he was really an analyst, then his analysis was terrible, and for this he should be fired. He also said that he knew that the guy was talking behind his back, and he was very surprised by his courage, because with the help of it, he created an entire leadership. But Rinell wondered if he had neglected his duties. That was all, and he told Ryuk that he was going to celebrate because his dismissal was a good reason. After all, he lost his rank and became a no-name, for which Rinell congratulated him. It was then that the user authentication began, where he received an unknown name under a regular number. It was believed that the suspect agreed with all the charges, and for this, he was deprived of his earned titles. In the battle with the Black Knight, the guy remembered all this because he had nothing left. No status, no name, and only the title of SRR level. The Black Knight was curious if this guy could withstand his attack. When he grabbed his dark matter, he wondered, where did he get his powers from? But it didn't matter to him what kind of power it was because the guy didn't. He couldn't prevent it, he was sure of that. Watching the Black Knight attack Ryuk again, the guy had a question. Was this the end? And would his story really end like this? And when the dark matter approached the eye, he told himself that nothing had changed in his life, because he still had to shovel it all out. Remembering his promise, he understood that everything could not happen just like that, and that very betrayal on the part of Cynthia, which he could not come to terms with. And even at that moment, he was attacked by the strongest Dark Knight. He resolutely said to himself such words as, he was going to rise from day one to the top of everything, after which he jumped up and grabbed the Dark Knight's head. And he thrust his blade into this ghost, fleetingly remembering how Rinell told Cynthia that she should not communicate with him, which he really didn't like, because what he did was extremely inappropriate. Therefore, having awakened the power within himself, Ryuki promised himself that this Rinell would receive what he deserved for what he did. His defeats in his past life helped him cope with such a powerful opponent, after which the battle reporting system surfaced, which reported that for the Dark Knight's motives, he received 15,000 EXP units, which were converted into RP, as well as the Magic Stone and the Knight's Armor, and the Yuguan SR ticket. Before disappearing, the ghost of the Dark Knight recognized the guy as a strong man who had defeated the darkness. And for this, he wished him to go only forward. The guy told the knight that even if he had simply remained silent, he still had no other choice but to move on. He saluted such a strong opponent, after which he disappeared. At this time, the guy was already being watched from another place. One of the people was curious, when was this fight video uploaded? Then he received an answer that a few hours ago they had this video, and also a counter question. Did he want to know who this person was? But he replied that this was not necessary since the identity of this guy was known to him. Instead, he told them to keep an eye on this guy, and then asked where Rinell was. This man was Gabriel Darius, the master of the Lindsay Guild. People were surprised by the video that came out the same day, namely, that No Name was able to defeat the Dark Knight, and they considered him a complete madman. It also shocked them, because no one had managed to do this before. And they didn't understand how an ordinary guy could defeat him. People even began to doubt that he was really a real knight, and it was easier for them to consider it some kind of bug. They were perplexed by the fact that in WAP, there was a parry ability and a weapon in the form of a sword and pistol. And although there were still similarities, they were different, so they considered it nonsense. And yet, despite this, they accepted the fact that the Dark Knight had been defeated. They then wondered if the training area was badly damaged. And they thought that if after all this was not a mistake, then everything could be explained? After all, it was just a toy, and the time initialization and other fake bugs should be fixed for the most part. Watching the video, they didn't understand how it was possible to explain this guy's reaction speed. Then Ragnar, a second-level analyst of the Lindsay Guild, found information that this guy was previously known under the usual number 7017. She prided herself on being an analyst, but with her knowledge, the girl was unable to fully understand this video. Namely, that only 2 hits were enough to defeat the boss. No matter how you look at it, the word error in this form was unacceptable. And she believed that the best solution was for the guild boss to contact this player, but the other analysts did not like this idea. Then the girl was outraged that the elder objected to this, but he explained that this player was certainly not bad, but still, he believed that it was impossible, and there was simply an error on his account. Then analysts came to Rinell Darius to talk about this player, but when they heard his name, they couldn't understand who it was. Then people told him that this man was an analyst for their guild Lindsay 3 years ago, and it was then that this guy created a very detailed strategic plan. After all, this was the same No Name who was fired from the guild at his request. Rinell, in turn, said that there were a lot of such people, and based on this meager information, he could not remember him. Then, the elder said that a video was uploaded of this guy defeating the Dark Knight of Chaos, and he saw it in person. Then Rinell said that it was just a mistake because there were no problems in using bugs to defeat the Dark Knight. But the elder only repeated once again that he had expelled this guy, and that meant, but then Rinell interrupted him, saying that it didn't matter to him, and he also didn't understand, since when did the elder begin to care about such trifles? After all, this guy was the most ordinary No Name, and he also added that such people were a waste of time. Listening to all this, the headman didn't even know how to respond to this. Here as people were interested in what they would do? Then the headman said that there was a high probability that this guy was trying to lure them into a trap with such a demonstration, so it was worth treading carefully. And he decided that for now they should just observe the situation. After all, it was not urgent enough to act in a hurry, because even if they collect information, they will not lose anything. But when he left work, he was worried about his stupid brother, because he spent a lot. At this time, the system informed Ryuk that physical recovery had reached 87%, and at this point it offered to take a break. But the guy just started complaining that he was in pain, and he thought that he couldn't cope with the Dark Knight. After all, he had serious injuries and wounds. The pain was the same as in reality, but he believed that he should get used to this, because he would constantly experience a similar feeling when fighting such powerful ghosts. After some time, the guy hit the road. And now he could calmly say goodbye to the training area and move on to a more serious place. He knew that this world was built around the core content, and the tower in front of him was a demonic god. At this stage, Ryuki understood that he would not get there because first he had to conquer various dungeons to prove his abilities, which was the main goal. The system didn't understand why he would release the video so quickly. After all, it was too dangerous, as it attracted enemies. Ryuki said that he knew about all the risks, but he had his own plans for this. The guy was sure that people considered it just a mistake, which was not uncommon in games. Talking about the UR rank was a mistake, and even if they act, the head will begin by collecting information. And the guy suspected that the head of the guild would suspect that this was a trap. After all, unlike Rinell, he was a cautious person. The system was curious by releasing the video. Was he trying to confuse them? Then the guy said that this was exactly his plan, because the more attention he received, the more he limited their capabilities. In addition, he believed that if the transformations that the system told him about were true, then it was possible to hide a physical body in the labyrinth and use the capabilities of UR. After all, he found a way to crush Rinell Darius, and all he could do was lure him into the labyrinth. After all, if he notices him, he will definitely want to come for him. It was only necessary to incite him a little, and at that moment Rinell appeared. This will be a great chance for Ryuk to deal with him. The system invited the guy to play gacha so that they wouldn't get bored along the way, and besides, Ryuk had accumulated a sufficient number of tickets. And in total, there were 20 Yuguan tickets and 2 tickets for the SR rank, and there were also 15,000 RP points. The guy informed the system that upon arrival in the village, he would need to leave the labyrinth every 10 days for safety reasons. After all, the avatar, the body of the master, was a different technology, because the physical player remained in reality and there was danger for him. And conversion was a method of transferring the body itself, so there was no need for such low-level concerns. Then the guy realized that his body was real, and not an avatar as he had thought before. In any case, the system informed him that since it was obliged to perform the conversion in an emergency situation, it was recommended that he return to reality. What the guy was thinking about, of course. But since the recommendation was from the system, he accepted it and moved into reality. He returned to where he was last, which was the random box store. It was then that the system jokingly invited him to spin the random boxes again. Ryuki found it strange that he didn't feel any pain after what happened to him the last time in the world. But the system reported that all these were the privileges of the UR rank. Afterwards, she said that a couple of hidden cameras were installed in the store, which few people knew about, and she suggested that he block them, but the guy only thought about it. At that second, the door opened, from which people came out who were glad to meet this stranger again. It was the same boss of this establishment who was surprised that, after everything that had happened, the guy still looked good. He wondered where he had been hiding from them all day. Seeing these bad guys, Ruki was not very pleased because his previous meeting with them almost cost him his life. The boss said that thanks to the cameras he was able to get there quickly, because he was still interested in the fact that the guy had knocked out something valuable from a random box. But before they could finish speaking, the people told their boss that the guy had decided to run away. The system wanted to know why the master was running away, and Ryuki said that this was obvious, since it was unlikely that he would have been able to cope with 10 bandits. Then the system asked him to plan a route to avoid a bad outcome. She said that at the next corner he should have turned right, and then he should have walked 100 meters and turned left. The guy wondered, should he have trusted the system? Suddenly, running away along the safe route of the system, Ryuki was shocked, because he came to a dead end with high walls on top of which there was barbed wire. Ryuki was angry and wanted to teach the system a lesson for doing this to him. But she began to run away from him, saying that there was a good reason for this. At that moment, they were overtaken by bandits who were curious. Had this guy finished his marathon? The gang boss said that after so much effort, he managed to disappear yesterday, and he was wondering how he managed to do it. Realizing that the bandits had driven him into a dead end, the guy did not know what to do in such a situation. But they told him that they wanted to take back in an amicable way what he had managed to knock out from their machine guns. Ryuki understood that from the very beginning they wanted to get Yuguan. Then the system told him that there was a wooden sword on the left side. Ryuki was surprised and did not understand what she was talking about. The system said that, unfortunately, he did not have any special items that he could call into reality. But despite this, she brought him to that place on purpose because there were weapons there, and she wanted him to take this wooden sword. Ryuki was indignant because he did not understand what place this weapon was and what he was supposed to do with this stick. Suddenly, a magical glow began to emanate from the wooden blade, which the guy certainly did not expect. Seeing that the stranger was about to fight with these bandits, it became funny. A big guy stepped out in front of them and told his boss that he could handle this guy himself. While attacking, he asked the no-name not to be angry, because he was only at him. And when the guy threw his stick like a boomerang, which flew to the side, the big guy began to mock. Suddenly she came back and dealt a serious blow, after which he fell to the ground. And everyone else was surprised that this guy managed to cope with this jock. The gang boss didn't want to waste any more time, so he ordered his men to take what he needed. Ryuk was only amused by this, because he realized that he could use his skills from the labyrinth, namely, wielding a third-level SR sword and parrying at the same strength. He realized that no matter how lucky he was, the chance to use the skills in reality was a great cheat. The bandits didn't understand what happened, and how did the guy turn out to be so strong? After all, he is an ordinary no-name. They were already starting to dislike this mission, which made their boss more and more angry. And then he raised his voice at them and told them not to let themselves be deceived. He didn't care that this guy was so strong. He believed that they could take him in numbers, so he ordered his men to defeat him. He considered this guy too impudent. He assumed that the guy became so strong because of yesterday's things. Well, since they were black mambas, they believed that no name could not compare with the ruler of this territory. when suddenly he heard the screams of his people, which led to misunderstanding. He only heard cries for help, which were terrible. Meanwhile, Ryuki was already dealing with the last bandit. With such strength, the guy felt great, because before in the real world he was an ordinary weakling, and now he had delusions of grandeur. He was aided in this by his SR-level ball skills, which gave him increased ball proficiency and improved his ability with a one-handed ball. When the guy took this stick, he felt a surge of strength and skills that he used in the maze. And this conversion was completely different from ordinary players. After all, he managed to transform his body and not the avatar. And if he becomes stronger in the labyrinth, then this will be reflected in reality. The boss told the guy that everyone he left had something in common. Because yesterday he took away his right to create an account, he would not forgive him for this. So he told his people to attack him again and take away what should rightfully belong to him. Well, this time this attack was not crowned with victory, since everyone who decided to attack the guys got what they deserved. After which the guy said that the next one would be the boss, who helped him a lot yesterday, while the boss himself tried to reach his weapon to attack the guy. The boss started waving him in different directions. He was restless, and already asked the guy not to come near him, just let him get away from him. In turn, the tricks were easily repelled by his weapon, which he certainly did not expect. He was able to achieve this effect using his level 3 SR parry ability. The guy didn't understand what this boss was saying because his subordinates were attacked, and he believed that, as a boss, he had to take revenge for them. Well, he asked the guy to leave him alone, after which he suddenly reached for his weapon. The guy didn't think that the boss would decide to give up so quickly. He assumed that he would decide to take his weapon, so he blocked his hand in advance so that he could not do anything. The boss didn't like that this guy was so devaluing his ability because he was a black mamba. As soon as he attacked him, the guy immediately repelled his attack. Ryuki said that it was funny when you felt a surge of power, and he was curious if the boss felt the same way when doing this to him yesterday. After all, having defeated them, he felt relieved, because before the guy was in the same place. That day, the right to create an account that they took away was his only hope, which came to him when he had nothing but despair. So he promised that he would take away his hope just like he did to him. The boss told the guy that if he indulged in this way, he would have problems. Well, it didn't matter at all because all he needed was for the boss to shut up. At that moment, a stingy tear began to flow from him, and he asked the guy to sit with him. Well, no matter how it was, Ryuki decided to repay him in the same way as he did. And having come home, the system was curious why the master did not get rid of these people, because it was dangerous and they could not take revenge on him. Then he told the couple that it was very easy for him to deal with them, but he didn't want to stoop to their level, so he simply suppressed them with his strength. And now they won't bother him for a while. Then the system realized that fear and cruelty were human weaknesses. Ryuki asked the system if it had done anything with these bandits. The system confirmed this and reported that it had interfered with their internal seed structure and manipulated the visual part of their boss. Trousers was surprised that the system was capable of this. Then she said that this operation only worked when the person was mentally ill, and she believed that the boss saw her master as a terrible monster that he could not defeat. Now he felt fear, and she was sure that he would not want to go against him. Still, Ryuki believed that he should have completely hidden the existence of the system, because if the whole world found out, it would turn upside down. Then the guy decided to take out his sharp folding device. He was pleasantly surprised because even with it, he could use his fencing skills and related skills were learned intuitively, which was pretty good because a weapon with a long range was inconvenient to carry. He decided to inquire about Yuguan, and then the system revealed that the master originally lived outside of Yggdrasil, and despite the fact that at this time he had no side effects. For example, accelerated aging due to the influence of time labyrinth. Having heard this guy, he said that he had assumed this earlier. Then the system said that if this flaw was still present, then such a rank could not be called UR. Sometime later, Ryuki met with the bandit leader to begin action. The guy assumed that modern technology helped him recover in just a few hours. What the leader confirmed was that he was surprised that this no-name called him, despite what he had to go through. The guy suggested that he paid for his treatment from the money he received for the right to create his account. Hearing this, the leader got scared and said that if it was about that amount, then he asked to give him time to reimburse everything. He hoped that the guy would be less lenient with him this time. Ryuki said that he was still alive only because of his whim, and asked not to forget about it. And when the leader said that he understood everything, then Ryuki informed him that he needed help, to which he replied that he was ready to do anything, after which they both went to the red light district. which was not particularly known for its luxury since there were many beggars. The leader of the gang knew this guy named Goro, who was just begging, and he had to drive him away so that he would not interfere with them. Arriving at a place called Yorozuya Tenko, Ryuki asked if they had come there, to which the leader replied that they had come correctly, because everyone was using this place for illegal transactions. Then the guy decided to make sure and ask if he sold the right to create his account here. But in response, the Bantha leader only bowed his head and muttered something. Inside, there was a man who carried out all the operations, who was happy to welcome new clients to his place. Ryuki was surprised by the fact that he seemed like a young guy, but had a voice like an old man, and he asked if he was the owner of this store, which the guy confirmed, and introduced himself as Zhu Tenko, the owner of this Yorozuya. Who was wondering what this stranger was looking for in such a place? The system informed Ryuk that this owner's body was non-human, and it was trying to capture basic information about this player. Then the guy understood why his voice was so strange, but he believed that facial expressions with the whole body were prohibited. Then, Zhu Tenko said that it was a rather expensive model, but he still managed to purchase it. However, he found it funny that the guy was talking about the law with a black market dealer. Since Ryuki had not previously answered his question about why would they send it there, he said that he wanted to know what happened to his right to create an account. Zhu Tenko did not understand why this guy needed such information. At that second, listening to the entire dialogue, the gang leader was scared and began to grind his teeth. Zhu Tenko understood everything and said that the right to create an account was an extremely unique offer due to its rarity. But he said that, unfortunately, he had sold it a long time ago. He wanted to know if the guy was interested in anything else. And then Ryuk, upset by the sale of the account, said that there was something else. The guy said that he came to him to trade with goods that needed to be sold. Zhu Tenko then said that he was willing to take a look at his proposal because he was involved in various sales. He couldn't wait to look at his goods in the bag. How a friend's face suddenly changed with a smile to a surprised look, all because he couldn't believe it. That I saw in front of me a full bag of magic stones. Zhu Tenko didn't understand whether the guy didn't know their true value and decided to bring them to him. Ryuki asked not to mock him just because he was a no-name, because it was an elementary thing, and he knew its value. Artifacts from the labyrinth were divided into two types. The first included those that cannot be used in the real world. And to the second, objects that materialize in this world. Magic stones were a special artifact from which ether was extracted. And the higher their rank, the more pure ether could be extracted. Due to this, the social status of the players also increased. Zhu Tenko said that this was why it was difficult for him to understand the guy, because the best solution was to sell the stones legally rather than through a black market dealer. To which the guy replied that he did not want to sell them publicly because he received them himself. Zhu Tenko believed that it was stupidity that No Name managed to get magic stones. Looking at them, he said that it was time for Luca to go home, which made him surprised and did not understand why they were driving him away. He began to be indignant about this because he did not want to leave in the most interesting place. But Ryuki was not going to miss the opportunity to sell stones because of him, so he insisted that he leave the counter. But since Luca did not immediately understand him, the guy had to kick him out. Zhu Tenko admitted that at first he thought that he was an ordinary guy who was lucky enough to steal magic stones, but he asked for forgiveness. After all, being a no-name was normal, but recently something deviating from this norm has appeared. Ryuki didn't understand what this merchant meant. He said that he did not think that the sensational hero from the video would appear at his stall, which was unexpected. After all, he did the impossible by defeating the Dark Knight. Therefore, Zhu Tenko was glad to greet the guy whose name was number 7017. And he said that if he was trying to hide his identity, then he needed to be more careful and also about this magic stone. It was called the World of Fanaticism. This stone fell from the Dark Knight of Chaos. This is exactly what was displayed when evaluating it. And Ryuk was the only one who defeated this boss in the tutorial area due to a mistake. Therefore, calling him by name, he wanted to ask again, what was the purpose of his visit to this store? The guy admitted that his name was Rook 7017 and he appreciated his advice, but he came for shopping and so he just wanted to get down to business. Togo Zhu Tenko asked what he wanted from the black market trader. Ryuk then said without hesitation that he wanted a MOD and was wondering if one was available. Then, Zhu Tenko became nervous and began to speak in a whisper. He was shocked that this guy was talking about such a thing, and he was curious if he even knew what it was. But Ryuk knew that this reduced the complexity of the maze, but it had side effects. The merchant said that most of the mods were cancelled due to lack of functionality and major flaws. Ryuki was sure that this merchant had a couple of them hidden, so he turned to him. The merchant was surprised that even No Name knew that it was a chip that artificially altered the components of the labyrinth. But he had to ask if he had seen the dead man outside his store? Ryuk didn't understand what he was getting at by talking about that beggar. Then he told the guy that the man was a MOD user. Previously, he said that he wanted to experiment with sensory control. So he bought the MOD analgesia, and although it was weak, it increased the pain threshold, from which the result was catastrophic. Although the pain was dulled, the other senses became very sharp, which was what killed him. He even tried to remove all installed mods, but unfortunately, it was too late, since it is impossible to return the feelings back. In fact, there were many more side effects, so the authorities banned its development and completely got rid of the remaining ones. There were a few mods that were tested for safety, but they were publicly available. And beyond the mods, the merchant still had a long way to go, as far as some people were concerned. Suddenly, looking through his lens, Jutenko wondered about that. That guy defeated the Dark Knight of Chaos single-handedly? Which the guy confirmed and said that on the internet they called him a cheetah for this. And whether he was a genius with cheating skills or a simple fool using mistakes, Ryuk was all right. Because he was not against any means or methods. He believed that it was better for him to use them than to remain in place without progression. The merchant was curious if the guy knew how to work with mods. But he only asked in response whether he was interested in what would happen next. This was a very good offer, which made the merchant think. And he said that although most of the mods were removed, he was lucky enough to keep a couple. But first, he wanted to make sure that the guy really knew how to use them, so he provided him with a couple of others. Ryuki was sure that they were very dangerous, but he had Yuguan, and the guy believed that he would protect him. And the mod he held in his hand increased the attack power 3 times. The system said that it was terrible, since it was just a simple doubling of the number, which would not bring any effect. Then the guy chose the next one, which could predict the future 1 second in advance. And the idea was good, but Ryuk understood that it could not be realized. He believed that she could be a liability on the battlefield. The next one was a mod that turned everyone into beautiful ones. The system assumed that it worked on the principle of hallucination deceiving the eyes. Then, the guy took a mod to increase all abilities by 1 and 2 seconds. But he didn't like it, because it put too much strain on the brain and body. Then he took the next one, increasing sensitivity 3,000 times. But he didn't like that one either, just like the others, which were useless, which upset him. But the next one was a mod for manipulating probability, which he liked because it put less stress on the body than others. Ryuki believed that the person who created him was a genius. After all, the mod made it possible to influence events that could actually happen in favor of the player. And with its help, the probability of all outcomes of Yggdrasil will be 0.305% better. The system also liked this because the master would not be affected by the decrease in productivity due to the avatar, so the probability could be even 1%. The guy understood that it would be difficult to perceive such a low percentage advantage, but these insignificant numbers could be attracted to the random box. He decided and told the merchant that he would take 3 mods, which did not please the system, since it was difficult for it to believe that his choice fell on increasing the rate of the random box. The merchant, in turn, was happy, because the guy managed to choose only normal fashions from the pile of garbage. But these words that it was trash made the guy think. The merchant asked Ryuk to wait, because he misunderstood him, because he did not want to deceive him. After all, he offered clients who requested fashion to take a test. Then, Ryuk was wondering if he knew the creator of the mods. After thinking a little, the merchant said that he would give a discount as an apology. And he could use these things that were erased before they even appeared on the scene. Afterwards, the user was authenticated, and the system offered the guy to install the mod, warning that installation was possible only once without possible cancellation, to which he agreed. The merchant wanted to ask one last question. He was wondering if he really could master Modi, then what was he planning to do with such power? But Ryuki just smiled, after which there was silence. The merchant fell to the floor because the guy evaporated with such speed that he was knocked over. But Jutenko only laughed at this avoidance of the question. Suddenly, Ryuki appeared and just said something about the top of the world, which included both bronze and silver. So are gold and platinum, called Rinell. And he said that it didn't matter whether it was a diamond, which was also called the king, but Ryuki planned to crush everyone who was at the top. This idea sounded very interesting, which amused the merchant. And he said that no name could come to him at any time of the day. After which, Ryuki set off on a journey to conquer this world. The system was surprised, because it thought that he would have problems due to the fact that he was a no-name, but surprisingly everything went smoothly. The guy was even in the labyrinth, but no one would have thought that he was an ordinary no-name, especially in this village. Although it was quite busy there, and it was strange that no one noticed him. There were good people there, a lot of sellers in general, the most ordinary village or not. Perhaps there was something mysterious lurking there. Ryuki thought that this scene looked like something from the Middle Ages, because it was so peaceful there. The system was curious. When will the master finally start spinning random boxes? After all, he had accumulated a lot of points. Ryuki was tired of this gambling, and he asked to be patient a little since this could be done at any moment. Suddenly, the guy noticed something strange. Namely, the looks from ordinary workers who had just done this fell on him. The system also noticed this and wondered if the master had done something to make him so closely watched. The guy said that ordinary NPCs hated people because stupid players considered them unrealistic and called them insects. They committed many atrocities, so it was not surprising that the locals looked at him like that. Suddenly, the guy saw a picture of someone catching a local thief. It was a merchant who was angry that this guy had the courage to steal his goods, but he in turn asked for forgiveness and said that he did it only because he was hungry. But he was not going to just let the guy go. And watching all this, Ryuki realized that in this village it was not as quiet as it seemed at first glance. But it seemed to him that the clothes of this thief NPC were not the same as the others in this village. The system said that he was a resident of the labyrinth called Space Alien. Yggdrasil completed this game 3 months ago. Then the guy realized that this game had completely disappeared. Therefore, people traveled to other labyrinths to survive because they had no other choice. He thought it was his imagination, but this place was really noisy, and all because some were unable to adapt to another world. The system said that unnecessary labyrinths were destroyed by Yggdrasil and WAP, and could wait for the same to be taken into account. Then the guy realized that they should have acted even faster. He knew that even if the game was completed, before that moment he would be able to destroy Rinell and Lindsay. After a while, Ryuk managed to find a place to stay for the night, and then the system again became interested in the fact that they could play a gacha? But the guy said that the first thing they should have done was check the mod. And then the system checked and reported that the merchant had not lied because the probability of random boxes had increased. The percentage of N rank decreased, while for the rest it became higher. From a low of 0.3%, the chance increased to 1%. And although the difference was not great, the guy was pleased with such indicators. Since Yugen had been waiting for this for a long time, Ryuki suggested that he play the gacha. The system shouted that there were 40 regular tickets and only 2 SR level tickets, and there were also 15,000 RP points. And with such a quantity, there was a high chance of dropping an SSR level item. The guy wanted to start with 40 regular tickets, but imagine his surprise after opening all the boxes. After all, from such a heap he only got rubbish. Which is why he was disappointed, which is probably why he wasn't in such a hurry to open them. He spent 40 tickets and didn't get a single SR, and the probability manipulation mod sucked. The system decided to joke and said that with this level of garbage he could sell toothbrushes. But Ryuki did not appreciate this and told this vacuum cleaner that it was better to give him a good item and not joke so stupidly. But he in turn asked him to stop because it was done for his sake. Suddenly the guy saw 2 rare objects fall out. His face changed dramatically because it seems that those were SSR items. Now he believed in probability manipulation mods. But the system considered him a dirty fraudster because it was not good to use cheats. The guy got a new SR level skill called Sprint, as well as an SSR level intuition skill. The guy knew that with Sprint he could move quickly, but he didn't fully understand what the intuition skill did. After all, it strengthened the sixth sense, and upon reaching the aisle, it allowed one to look into the root of the world. This is exactly what the equipment for this skill looked like. Ryuki didn't feel any change at all, other than realizing that this skill had the same rank as the first SSR. The guy wondered if he should have leveled up. After all, 7,000 RP points remained until the next level of intuition progression. Which surprised him, because it was too much, because for other skills, increasing to the 3rd level cost only 2,100 RP points. The system also thought it was stupid to spend points on unknown skills. And the best solution was to take the chance to knock out another SR level item. The guy began to think that it would be better to spend 100 gacha on improving his skill. But the system tried to dissuade him, because RP was a rather valuable resource that was better spent on boxes. But the guy made a decision and immediately increased all his skills one level higher. Now swordsmanship was at the 4th skill level, and 1 attack boost was added. Parry has also been increased to level 4, and an increase in temporary effect enhancements has also been added. The new sprint skill had improved to level 2, and now the instantaneous movement at high speed was 14 meters, and the recovery time was about 16 seconds. The guy still had 8,730 RP points left, and he was thinking about the fact that it was possible to increase his sword skill to the limit of the Yuguan system, or distribute the remainder among other indicators. But then, the system kept reminding him that there was still a chance to open the box, and it offered to spend the rest of the RP on this. But he was not interested, so Ryuki raised his sword skill to level 5, which greatly disappointed the system. And this impudent vacuum cleaner simply boiled with anger and fell on the bed, emitting smoke. While the guy was happy with his decision, after which the system reported that the maximum level of sword proficiency had been reached, and that the peak for increasing the new rank had been reached, which made Ryuki happy because he didn't mind raising his rank at all. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of the guy, which surprised him since he had not done anything. In front of him was a nugget, from which a golden glow emanated. Ryuki asked the system to explain to him what was happening, but this stupid vacuum cleaner overheated so much that it was turned off. Ryuki could only guess what it was. Suddenly, the system nevertheless reported that upon reaching the maximum level, a reward is given, a Yugen X ticket and a Yugen X ticket. And also the sword skills were strengthened to SR plus level of influence of Yggdrasil, and the skills when wearing a sword were strengthened. And also when using it, it was possible to activate the 1st level Aura Blade. The guy was happy because he could not even imagine such power as Yuguan. After all, many players could not master even ordinary swordsmanship, but this skill surpassed this skill many times more. That is why Ryuk felt such strength that he had never dreamed of before. And at the same time, the system did not understand why it chose this particular person as its master. After all, she just wanted to see the joy of different boxes falling out. The guy told Yuguan to stop whining since they had a new business. The system wanted to know where the master was going. Ryuki replied that he was going to the dungeon because Rinell took 1st place in it, and he wanted to take his title for himself. Since the master was going there for the first time, the system was worried about whether everything would be okay. Ryuki replied that he knew the dungeon he conquered well, so he was confident that he would not lose to him. At this time, a group of players were already standing at its entrance, ready to conquer the unknown of the darkness that the dungeon hid. The commander-in-chief told everyone not to let their guard down and be ready to defeat anyone. Among them was Ryuk, who did not want to listen to the commander-in-chief and planned to handle everything on his own, which surprised everyone. Then the commander-in-chief asked the guy to wait a minute, since it was not entirely clear to him why he was walking alone. After all, it was a dangerous dungeon, and it was not the best decision to go without a group. But Ryuki only coldly said that he knew about this, after which he began to enter through the portal inside. The group was surprised. They didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. They saw him for the first time and believed that he was a suicide bomber for doing such a thing. Suddenly, the commander-in-chief turned around after the words of his comrade that strange things were happening in this dungeon because no one had been able to conquer it for 3 months. And then he was horrified that this guy went there alone. At that time, Ryuk was beginning his journey into the witch's hideout dungeon. The guy set himself the task of breaking Rinell's record. Therefore, he unsheathed his blade, which lit up with flame for the first time. This was the same aura of the 1st level. And then the guy got ready, because it was time to attack the unknown. But he could not even think that from the very beginning he was already being watched. Through a magic ball, and the one who did it loved to catch such self-confident intruders. After all, they desecrated her sacred place, for which they had to pay, since this territory was not for them at all. And this terrifying witch was going to deal with him with her own hands, and she wanted to bring it as a sacrifice. This, by the way, was her hideout, where she was the boss. And because the guy entered it for the first time, he received a reward for the achievement in the form of 1 Yuguan ticket. It was difficult for Ryuk to navigate there because it was dark and nothing could be seen. But the guy understood that in any case, the structure of the dungeon was constantly changing randomly, and the only way to understand its real architecture was to see it with my own eyes. He was curious to check with the system about Rinell's record. He recalled that it was something like 17 hours and 30 minutes. Then, the system showed the guy the rating of being in this dungeon, and he was surprised that the second place after Rinell was 17 hours and 38 minutes, and the third place was 19 hours and 5 minutes. And then Ryuk was shocked because it was a big time difference. Since there was a player who got so close to Rinell, Ryuk was going to remember Arcia from this guild. After wandering around the dungeon for a short time, the guy came to a place that was infested with bats. He knew that these creatures attacked in groups in caves, where it was difficult to maintain visibility and maintain distance. And if even one bit, you could get a debuff, which was a problem. But luckily, Ryuk had a simple solution to this problem. Even the system was unaware of this device that the guy used against these bats. Covering his ears, the guy said that it was a sound device, after which a strong sound wave occurred. Even the system could not withstand such an impulse. Ryuk said the bats were sensitive to noise. The system asked the guy to warn about this next time, because she thought that her eardrums would burst. But the guy was perplexed that the robot believed that he had eardrums. He began to kill the bats one after another, those who were not affected by the sound effect. The system wondered, was it too slow for someone who was going to break the record? Then the guy replied that in any case, conquering the dungeon was a long undertaking. At that moment, the guy was worried about something else, because for the last 3 months, no one could conquer this dungeon. The system became interested in why this happened. Then, the guy said that the place was famous for its low level of difficulty. After Rinell cleared it, they began to treat it as a training place, but informally no one passed it for 3 months. And yet the system noticed that the guy had been standing still for a long time, and it believed that he was lost. But Ryuk denied this, and said that patterns were important in this place. But the system noticed that all this time he had been circling around the same place, and it seemed to her that they were lost. To dispel her doubts, the guy asked her opinion about how many manuals he could write when he was in the company. He said that this dungeon was also in the simulation, and he had seen it over 1,000 times. But the system saw that from that moment, they were only going around in circles. And it said that if the master really got lost, he could turn to her for help. But while she doubted him, the guy found another entrance. He also noticed that the third stalagmite had a curved scratch, while previously there were only straight ones. All because changes occurred when you passed this place for the 32nd time, which meant that the path to retreat was clear. Then the system assumed that this was how the master remembered the road. But Ryuki only said that she was too noisy and stupid. The guy said that this magical dungeon was created to make players get lost, so the structure of the cave changed in real time. It was necessary to find the right path using professional skills, so Rinell included his squad of allies who possessed them. But before discovering such skills, Ryuk had to memorize the paths on the map to conquer it. And according to his calculations, in 5 minutes they should be at the next point. The system was surprised that the guy could remember all the subtleties, because ordinary players could not even imagine this method. And she assumed that this method was intended for the single-player mode of the game, and she thought that her master was crazy. But then the guy said that he heard everything that this robot vacuum cleaner was saying. Ryuki reported that they would soon find themselves in the labyrinth. There were only 30 minutes left, which took longer than he could have imagined. And he wondered if there were any issues that were worth solving. And this was the reason for the players' failures over the past 3 months? At this time, the dungeon boss noticed that this clumsy and at the same time dexterous invader managed to get into the labyrinth. But she thought he was lucky one last time because she was planning to send him into the depths of despair. After all, very soon at the exit from the labyrinth there was her death magic, which was located on the floor. And she wanted this guy to be the first to experience her. As soon as Ryuk entered it, the magic immediately began to take effect, which he certainly did not expect. The system wanted to know what was happening, but the guy replied that he didn't know that. But he understood one thing. There was danger ahead. Then he had an idea and took out a spare doll, hoping that it might work. After he threw it, the magical effect began to take effect, and he could observe from the country how it worked. After Ryuk saw the black flame, he realized that it was instant death magic. He was at a loss because he believed that such traps should have appeared in the tower in the second half, but he didn't understand why they were there. The system said that it was unknown to her, but the characteristics of the dungeon had changed and she recommended that the master leave. The guy did not expect that such cruel traps awaited him from the very beginning. Looking at the other moves, all he could think about was there really no way out? Suddenly it dawned on him that the right path must be a dead end, but it seemed to him that there was nothing wrong with this road, in addition to the fact that it contained instant death magic. But Ryuk still assumed that it could be all because of his new skill, Intuition SSR, which was instantly activated after equipping. Watching the guy, the boss considered him lucky, who managed to save his life on a thin one. But she believed that it was only a matter of time, because no matter where he went, he could not escape her death magic. And she believed that the guy would be scared for the rest of his life. Suddenly, she was surprised because he disappeared from her field of vision, which rarely happened to anyone. But to her joy, she easily found it on her magic ball. But she never ceased to be surprised, because by that time the guy had already reached the central hall. And she didn't understand how he managed it. And yet, she suddenly became not interested in this, because she believed that he could not survive in this cave, because she had put a lot of effort into setting traps everywhere there. Suddenly, the guy disappeared from her field of vision again, which completely stunned her. Then the grandma boss started getting angry that this guy managed to do such a thing. She found the guy this time in the old laboratory, but earlier it seemed to her that he was in the opposite direction from the central hall. This place was with multiple spells, and although she had no idea what the guy was doing, she was sure that he was finished. But suddenly the grandmother fell completely into a stupor. She considered it impossible that the guy so skillfully avoided her traps, after which he disappeared again. She strained hard to understand where he was this time. And in order not to panic, she decided to activate all the traps at the same time. It was hard, but the grandmother believed that this tomboy had turned into another insect. Suddenly there was an explosion coming from behind her, and then the voice began to say something about how it was a shame for him to damage such precious material. And then he decided to ask if this was the boss's room. While the ominous grandmother could not describe the emotions she was experiencing at that moment, the system believed that all this was a deception and a terrible skill. The guy didn't understand. Did the vacuum cleaner want to watch him die? When the boss saw this guy, she asked a question about how he managed to get there, but Ryuk said that it was troublesome for him to explain everything because all he wanted was to deal with her quickly. He decided to name her the boss of the witch's hideout dungeon, but then changed his mind and named her the Lonely Witch Cereal. But holding his blade behind him, he still believed that these names did not suit her. Pointing his sword at her, he bluntly told her that she needed to come up with something less scary. Having acquired her full form, the dungeon boss told the guy that he had started this in vain. The dungeon boss wanted to know how this guy managed to bypass all her traps. At this time, Ryuk was content with the fact that this grandmother really believed that she would be able to defeat him, because the entire path was mined. The system noticed that the master at that second looked more like a villain than a decent player. The guy understood that he was still far from getting out, and he had a regular bug in front of him, and there was a high probability that he would die if he stepped on such a trap. And he began to think about how to wait out this bug. But Ryuk knew he couldn't do that if he wanted to take a position before Lindsay Rinfell's guild began to act. Suddenly, the system scanned the area and discovered many deadly traps. And since it was extremely difficult to find out their exact location, it began to worry about the master, because if he stumbles even once, then... But despite the fears of the system, the guy immediately rushed off no matter what. After the system saw whole tubers of magical smoke from activated traps, it began to ask its master if everything was okay with him. Then he heard the voice of a guy who told him that he would be surprised, but he was fine. Then the system was surprised because it had never seen its master in such a fearless mood. After all, she thought that he was upset after the last gacha. But the guy was tired of hearing about this gacha, so he said he didn't care. This answer surprised the system, and it wondered what the master was talking about. And Ryuki replied that last time he hit the jackpot by drinking a valuable item. The grandmother boss realized that the deception did not affect the guy's intuition, because she calculated the gaps in space and the bugs created. Ryuki told the boss that this was only a small percentage of his potential, because in the future he was going to improve his intuition, but for now, it was only at the initial level. The system noticed that this was certainly an amazing skill, but it was only a human feeling. The guy believed that the system was right, but at that time his main task was to survive in this place. The Lonely Witch Cereal was not happy that the intruder had entered her lair. She immediately began to scatter many deadly traps everywhere while casting her spells. This began to fascinate the guy, and he became under her influence. But he came to his senses in time and managed to dodge. If he had not managed to do this, then he would have been in the place of the shadow. Ryuki understood that it was useless to drag out the battle because the witch's attacks were of the same type. Using his sprint skill, he got closer to her, but she began to shout out that it was a mistake. Then the guy decided to use the second SR rank sword skill. Ryuki admitted that she was a strong opponent, but he planned to finish her off as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the grandmother began to say something about how she was free, and that she no longer needed to follow any instructions. And while she was going crazy, the guy did not miss the opportunity to attack her. He already thought that one blow was enough and that victory was his, as if some unknown force emanating from the lone witch Cyril threw him away. When he landed, he didn't understand what it could be. At this moment, the witch's head returned to its original body position, and then the system informed the master that this boss could constantly regenerate, and apparently, it was the main bug of this dungeon, which did not please the guy at all. He understood that normal attacks would not work against her strength. Therefore, in order not to get caught, he had to dodge, since he did not want to neglect his intuition, because one mistake could lead to his instant death. Suddenly, while he was thinking, he did not notice at all the cloud of energy that was heading towards him. Having started to run away, the guy decided to ask Yuguan if there was any other way to deal with this. Then the system reported that it had assumptions about this, so it changed the characteristics of the evaluation mode in advance. And now the guy could identify monsters by worshipping the great UR system. And when the guy heard this, he turned on the monster assessment mode. After that, he found out that the lonely witch Cyril was from the world of Phantasm, had an infinite regeneration skill, was at the 25th level, had the ability of a bugged death trap and possessed death magic, which also had a bug. When Ryuk saw that now wings had also appeared, he was extremely surprised that the grandmother had also begun to fly. But still, he continued to chase after her, avoiding all the traps in order to defeat the boss once and for all. At the moment, the guy also activated the pen of a lonely witch, which said that she was an alien, in the other category with the name of the bug. Ruck did not expect it because the guy believed that the world where this individual was from was destroyed 3 months ago. But it dawned on his friend that this was the very reason for the bug that gave out information that she was an alien. When the witch began to make her attacks, everything around the dungeon shone with bright colors. At that time, the Yuguan system told its master not to worry because she was nearby. She also asked not to touch the traps, because even a touch with the little finger could lead to his death. But looking at how the guy ignored her, it was scary. She was excited and wondered if the master had gone crazy. But the only answer I heard was that he was going to climb to the top, and that this flame would not stop him. But the witch Cyril had a different opinion on this matter, so she accumulated a huge amount of dark energy. Looking at this, the guy understood that in order to survive, he simply shouldn't touch it. So he was just going to turn away from the attack. The grandmother was confident that she would be able to deal with the unwanted guest, since this time she blocked all escape routes. Suddenly, a blade flashed behind her, and Ryuk's voice spoke, saying that she was the same as this dungeon. He managed to fool her and will appear behind her. And he told her that borrowed power always became unreasonable at some point, and no matter how it covered the entire territory, all the same weaknesses would be displayed. And he just needed to attack her wings, because they were the very cause of the malfunction. But the grandmother asked to wait with this because they gave her freedom. And the guy, of course, didn't quite understand what she meant. And then she said that she had been in this dungeon for a long time and was fulfilling her role, and that she never had doubts or feelings. And having received these wings, Cyril was freed from the curse. The guy realized that the witch wanted to free herself from her role. It was very similar to him. What surprised her greatly, and she didn't understand what he was talking about. Then Ryuk said that he also tried his best to escape from this world, which looked like a dump. Then Cyril suggested that if they were similar, then he could understand her feelings. The grandmother grinned and said that if he cooperates with her, then... And while the witch said something about cooperation, the guy realized that if he destroys her freedom, he will gain incredible fame. After some deliberation, he finally deprived Cyril of her wings. He managed to do this by activating the SSR skill. After that, Ryuk saw her indicators, such as Magic Stone Cereal, %, her heart, %, her robe, %, Old Wooden Staff, %, Amulet of Glory, %, Mandrake, %. Then she said that he was a simple intruder in her refuge, and since the bug disappeared and the boss returned to its original state, she ordered him to fall at her feet for what he had done. Without thinking twice, the guy pierced her with his blade. After all, nothing changed after her return. She just had to lose, and he would become a little closer to his glory, after which the system rewarded him for completing the dungeon and gave him the Yuguan X ticket, and since the lone witch's hideout was cleared, he received a reward in the form of a Yuguan X ticket and also Yuguan X tickets. and for first place a Yuguan SRX ticket. Battle report. Victory received. Expan RP, Magic Stone, Cereal, and her heart. Ryuk seemed disappointed that there was such a small reward for such a boss. Even though the grandmother had a bug, she still seemed weak to him, and the reward was stingy. Since even for the Dark Knight, he was rewarded more generously. The system said that manipulating the probability was not that big of a deal. The guy said that, in principle, he didn't expect anything sensible from her, but he was glad that Katabi received a ticket with an SR item. And most importantly, he was able to beat Rinell's record. At this time, those players whom Ryuk had previously met at the entrance to the dungeon suffered another defeat. Some did not understand why they could not clear it, but the rest of the team told one guy that it was because he got lost and they had to look for him. And they also began to blame him for the fact that he had no combat experience at all. Their boss did not like this discord in the team, and he began to reassure them by saying that this dungeon had long been impossible to pass. And he said that next time they would team up and go there with another group. Suddenly they noticed Ryuk, and were surprised that he managed to survive there solo for 7 whole hours. And their leader believed that this guy simply gave up and went home after this. He expected this because it was clear from this guy that he had a lot of guts. And that in any case he realized the reality. When suddenly his words were interrupted by a notification of information about the dungeon, which updated its data. The leader of the players was surprised when he saw that the rating had been updated and someone had managed to complete this dungeon. And the first place was by as much as 17 hours and 20 and 30 minutes, which was already 10 hours better than the previous leader. Then they realized that the one they mocked was the best in this ranking. But the players couldn't believe that this guy managed to beat Rinell's record. Suddenly, one of the players accused Ryuk of cheating, because it simply could not have happened that he alone would have broken the record. Therefore, he threatened him with his life if he did not tell them the truth. Ryuk easily said that there was a bug in the dungeon, which greatly reduced the cleaning time. This answer quite outraged the other players because they did not understand how cheats could be used to change the game record. And the player who pointed his blade at him began to lecture him, which infuriated Ryuk. But despite this, he asked to be left alone and focus on conquering the dungeon. But the player didn't like the fact that this guy simply ignored him, and he didn't intend to leave it like that. Seeing the blade of the blade in front of him, Ryuk was easily able to dodge, and then with a slight movement of his hand, he taught the scoundrel a lesson and silently left. Having risen, the player was still angry and began to say that he would kill him. But the members of his team asked to finally stop this farce. The leader told him that the guy was not his opponent and that he shouldn't have behaved like that. But the player didn't like it, and he told the leader that he was just chickening out on this guy. What he didn't like, and he asked the player to finally wake up because Ryuk said that he only fixed the bug and did not take advantage of it. The other team members also didn't understand at first, but after these words they realized that Ryuk had not used mistakes. But they still believed that it was impossible to cope alone with all the bugs that arose in the dungeon. The leader said that this player looked very familiar to him, but he couldn't remember who he was. He probably remembered something about how Nunam escaped from the depths of the sea and defeated the Dark Knight of Chaos. And this is what the Emerald Lake looked like. And these bright red motley thickets were called the Scarlet Spider Forest. And these floating structures were the ancient ruins of the gods. Eating bread and looking at these pictures, the guy realized that these dungeons were one of the famous among the first records of Rinell and his team. Naturally, there were others, but he wanted to conquer these 3 places first. And the system was curious. Why? Then Ryuk replied that in one place there was another guild that set a new record 2 years ago. As for the record of Team Archaea from the GAES guild, the time is very similar to what he predicted from the strategy that he previously created a long time ago. And he didn't like it at all, the guy told the system. Nevertheless, he was going to conquer those 3 places in order to erase Rinell's name from the rankings. At this time, Rinell himself and his team were inside Jin's tower. He ordered his people to collect all their things because they had to leave. Besides, he really wanted to return home as soon as possible, when suddenly something distracted his attention. It was a huge ghostly kraken that looked very bad. Then it occurred to Rinell that it was on the Emerald Lake, but he was not entirely sure, because it could have been the Scarlet Spider Forest. Afterwards, Rinell told the team that the rest was all on them, and that they should not leave anything there, because he had matters that urgently needed to be resolved. Returning home, resting and looking at the statistics, he noticed something, namely that his records were defeated one after another. And he had the feeling that this was an attempt to provoke. He thought that Ryuki was planning to beat him. No matter how much he tried, he still couldn't remember who this guy was. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by an employee running in shouting that trouble had overtaken them. It was then that Rinell told this guy not to make such noise anymore. In response, he heard the news that the same Ryuki was broadcasting live. And this girl was Ragnar, an analyst for the Lindsay Guild. And she said that she had some predictions based on WAP. But she did not expect that it was possible to conquer 4 dungeons in a row and post a video about it. Dungeons, such as the bug in the Witch's Dungeon, Emerald Lake with its famous sea monsters, Scarlet Spider Forest with bloodthirsty giant spiders, ancient ruins of the gods with stone ghosts. This video received over 17 million views in just 3 days and set a new record. Thus, the guy attracted a lot of attention when he defeated the Chaos Dark Knight solo, so it was expected by the guild. There were skills and items that the analyst Ragnar did not understand, but in her opinion such movements were impossible unless one knew the structure of the dungeon by heart. And the most shocking thing was the strategy in the witch's hideout. After setting the record for more than 3 months, no one could clear it. And Ryuki 7017 put on such a show and easily conquered him, which was surprising. There was a note that this was a composite video, but the fact that the witch's refuge was cleared was an indisputable fact. To make this possible, it was necessary to have the talent of a lazy analyst. And she was interested in whether some guild supported this guy. She noticed that this event caused a storm of indignation on all fronts. But it was incomparable to how he defeated the Dark Knight of Chaos. If you release 4 videos at the same time, they will probably make a big splash, but these were just flowers. Compared to this video, which shocked many, the system believed that this master's plan was extremely different from the previous provocation, since after that those people began to recognize the guy as their enemy. To which Ryuk replied that he was ready for this. The system suggested doing what was planned after a short rest because it saw how the guy was out of breath, which Ryuki admitted. But he believed that if he gave those people even a little more time to think, his plan would fail. After all, 3 years ago, from that very day, his time stood still. It seemed to him as if he only had those emotions he experienced that evening, namely despair and hatred, since horses were his only reason for which he still lived. At this time, the guild was watching the same video in which the guy greeted everyone and said that he had previously posted a video called Escape of a No-Name from the Depths of the Sea, after which he told everyone his real name. Also that he regretted because he was not focused on conquering dungeons, but the truth that I would like to tell everyone. Seeing that same guy for the first time, the employees seemed quite adequate. Then they heard this guy saying that everyone might be wondering why he called his videos No Name. In fact, there was nothing surprising here because he was unknown. It is also possible that they might have been interested in why there was a non-name in the maze who did not have an account, probably because many of them could not believe it. After all, the account must have a silver rank or higher and also pass the exam. And sometimes only a recommendation from the guild was enough. Watching this video, people thought that this guy was just a troll since he did not have an account. Ryuk confirmed that sometimes a recommendation from the guild was enough to not have an account. After all, he was lucky enough to receive it, and he was not interested in whether people believed him or considered him a lie. At this time, Rinell also watched this video and read the comments under it. It was funny to him that people wanted to fight this no-name in the real world because such people were nobody in their world. But then he heard from Ryuk that he became a no-name because of a false accusation, which made him tense. And he was not going to sue for this because he understood that in any case no one would believe him. The guy also noticed that despite this, he had another reason for distributing these videos. Then he said that Rinell and the other fools from the guild were probably watching him, and he wondered if they had forgotten his face when he fell into the abyss. After all, he had to go through hell, but now he is back. And after these words, Rinell was terribly surprised. Ricky also told them to get ready because he would soon come for them. After this, people realized that it turned out that Lindis was this guy's enemy, and they were surprised by the huge number of views on his videos. And these super-secret organizations heard that this guy was now under surveillance. The person suggested that it looked like he worked at Lindsay and then got fired. And all such data was erased. Gabriel probably did his best to do this. And the unknown person was angry with Rinell, but unfortunately the record, which could put the guild at a disadvantage, was erased. Secret organizations asked this man to keep an eye on Rinell Darius because he was a valuable candidate. But they also considered him an ordinary middle peasant pretending to be a leader. And this man was wondering, what were they going to do? since he didn't think that the Lindsays would ignore Ryuk 7017. The organization said that they would like to remain on the sidelines for now, because they were unlikely to be able to decide anything at that time. And they decided to watch what was happening. This guy realized that this time he should have continued observing as usual, but he still wondered, could he handle this alone? But secret organization said that everything was moving along a certain trajectory, and it was too late. But this guy knew that in reality there were no restrictions, and that everything could be done. So he decided that he would do whatever he wanted. But he was wondering where his desire would lead. At this moment, the head of the guild, Lindsay, mentioned what Ryuk 7017 had recently said about them, and he was wondering what their relationship was to this matter. After all, it was true that he was once a member of his guild, but this guy was expelled due to his internal warehouse. What people were interested in was this guy's claim that he was falsely accused by Lindsay. And they would like to know if this really happened? Then the head of the guild replied that this was not justified on his part. Then people reminded him that there were many cases where many no-names maliciously harassed players due to such accusations. There was even talk about a conspiracy between Lindsay and the publisher of WAP. And to control the speed of its content, restrictions were placed on capturing dungeons and issuing items. And the journalists wanted to know how the head of the guild could comment on these suspicions. He then told them not to let rumors obscure the truth, as it was just a ploy to disparage their guild. And also the head noticed that they had already contacted the people involved in Ryuk and had all the information about him. He even went live to tell everyone about it. That soon everything will return to normal. He knew Lindsay was determined to use all her powers to sue him. But they will not allow harmful rumors to be spread. When this girl saw Ryuk entering her door, she said that the world was full of rumors about him. And she was pleasantly surprised that such a famous person came to Yorozuya. Ryuki replied that he didn't care what people said about him. And yet he asked if it seemed to him that the old man's voice did not suit this body, just like the last time when he was a boy. Jutenko said that he liked the voice and that having a full-body prosthetic was a real pleasure. After that, he offered him something interesting. But Ryuk didn't need it, so he asked him to get his mods. This upset Jutenko, but he said that the mods he saw earlier were the only ones left. Ryuk believed that he was lying, because he remembered very well his words that clients who needed them were offered to take a test. And didn't this mean that he was associated with the creation of the mod? And such assumptions from the guy surprised the merchant. And after that, Ryuk asked what if he dealt directly with him. After all, the guinea pig came on his own, so there was no reason to refuse him. Then, smiling, Jutenko began to take something out of his pocket. He said that he was asked to give this if Ryuk came, and said that if he mastered this mod, he could meet him. Having taken the mod, the guy was surprised by the arrogance of such a meeting. The system began scanning the disk and reported that this mod was mental nonsense, influencing the visual system, with the help of which it was possible to obtain various information. However, it was more powerful than the installed mod, and therefore was more dangerous. Ryuk said he wasn't against it, but he didn't like the idea of using it. Jutenko was very happy when he saw that the guy was not empty-handed towards him. And he wondered what he had in the bag for him. The guy said that this magic stone fell from the dungeon boss, and he asked him to deduct the commission for the mod, which Jutenko was happy to do. He also noted that even if the guy was wanted, he could come to him at any time. Walking down the street, Ryuk realized that the cost of the magic stone and the income from his video with YouTube were not worth it. At this second, the system could not help but suggest scrolling through the boxes a couple of times. But the guy replied that it was not the time for that, since he needed to meet someone. The system did not believe that the master could have another meeting, and it believed that he was joking. After all, he had zero social skills. And here was the one with whom the meeting was scheduled. Ryuk did not expect that this guy would be so nimble. The system didn't understand what was happening. Who is this guy? After all, her master could not have friends. Garcia greeted Ryuk joyfully and asked how he was doing. But the guy didn't answer. Then Garcia pointed his finger at the Yggdrasil tree. He seemed very pleased with this meeting. After all, they also used to come to this place and spend time there. But Ryuk was not very happy with those memories since a lot of time had passed. Garcia decided to see if he could give him a minute. Then, clenching his fist, Ryuk replied that he just wanted to talk to him. Garcia was happy about this and said that he should have contacted him a little earlier, and then he showed a strange gesture behind him. He thought that what happened 3 years ago was really terrible, because at that time he did not know what to do. After all, saving the unknown was a risk to life. Meanwhile, agents in suits were watching them. It was late, but Garcia would still like to apologize. He also noticed that Ryuk's face stood out too much, so he suggested going to a safe place. What the guy liked, and he agreed. After all, he was really afraid of human gaze. Garcia wanted to apologize for his sin in the past. He really regretted what happened 3 years ago. Ryuk admitted that it was difficult for him to accept his apology because he did not understand what the point was in it, and he wanted him to prove to him that he was really sincere with him. Garcia then said he had a plan to get back to bronze. This interested Ryuk, and he was curious if this was possible. Garcia replied that if the plan succeeds, then anything is possible. Only he warned that it would be difficult to pull it off in a short time. Earlier, Garcia was standing in the rain when Ryuki said something to him in surprise. The guy said that there was only a week left before his mother's operation, and then he asked him for help because he was the only one who could do it. He didn't ask for anything else, all he needed was to pay the cost of the operation, and he promised that he would definitely return the money to him. But Garcia then cruelly refused him and asked him to keep his hands off him. And then he said that he was just a dirty no-name who did not realize the situation. Then Ryuki stayed in the rain asking for help. After all, he needed money for the operation of a loved one. On the day Ryuki came, he was told that he should be glad. After all these unpaid hospital bills, surgical expenses, and much more, this is not the amount that a no-name could pay. After checking the body, he was asked to immediately leave the premises because there was no place for unknown people there. And then he remembered Garcia's words, in which he called him a dirty no-name who did not understand the situation. Garcia decided to ask why the guy suddenly became depressed. Ryuki told him that he would give him some advice from the past. After all, he knew that Garcia was going to deceive him with such a dirty show. Because the guy found out earlier what guild he was in, since he belonged to Russia's space aliens closed in the labyrinth. Not long ago, the world in the labyrinth of their game was destroyed, and Ryuki believed that Garcia was in despair. He just wondered what he was going to do after that. Hearing this, Garcia was frightened and began to deny that this could not happen. Ryuki said that no matter what happened between them in the past, he still didn't need his help. Suddenly, Garcia asked him not to leave and offered him to sell information about Lindsay. As a former participant, he was surprised how the guy didn't know about this. That the head of the guild is Rinfal's older brother Darius. After that, he asked Ryuki if he was the one who concluded this strategic plan. Gabriel had previously told him that, although he was a beginner, the level of development was quite high. The ace that came before Rinfal Darius, and he considered this guy to be the absolute pinnacle of the Lindsay Guild. And Garcia also thought Gabriel Darius was a heartless idiot. Therefore, he assumed that Ryuki would probably know how terrible that man was. And he was sure that he should have listened to him. After all, he just wanted to discuss his plan. He asked to be allowed to use his channel for advertising, and this might require the use of certain content. But Ryuki didn't want to listen to him, so he destroyed the information about Lindsay. This surprised Garcia very much, but Ryuki said that he did not need such garbage information. Garcia began to talk differently after that because of his plan, he had to shamefully swear in front of him. Calling him a fool, he began to attack him. Ryuki completely forgot that Garcia was not the right person to have a dialogue with. The guy repelled his attack and grabbed the scoundrel. Afterwards, he was going to ask him an important question. Namely, did he want to die so badly by doing this? But without hearing an answer, the guy still let this impudent imposter go. And then, he told him not to show his face again. At that second, Garcia began to scream that the target had escaped. Before he even had time to leave, armed men were already waiting for Ryuk at the entrance, who asked the guy not to make sudden movements. But the guy flashed like a flash, knocking down one of them. It was so fast that no one understood what happened. After that, they began to look for him. But they ran into a dead end. People did not understand where he had disappeared to. At this time, the guy climbed onto one of the buildings, all thanks to his sprinting skill, which gave him such speed. Ryuki immediately realized that this was arranged by Gabriel Darius, who nevertheless took radical measures, which was surprising for the guy. After this, the system's nerves began to go awry and she wanted to find out from the master what he was worried about. But the guy said that everything was fine, he just thought a little. But now Ryuk knew what to do next. But for now, he was going to return to WAP. Returning to his boss, he told Garcia that he had disappointed him, and yet he trusted him. Gabriel did not expect to receive such a response to his faith in this man. Garcia said he was sorry, but he had information about Ryuk. He began to say that the guy was 25 years old but Gabriel didn't let him finish because every time Every time he opened his mouth, he let him down, which he didn't like at all. He wondered if Garcia really believed that Lindsay could not have known such information about her own former employees. And then, he said that he was not there to listen to such trivial things. After mentioning a random box, Garcia said that this guy must have won the right to create an account using the gacha, and Garcia asked to be given a chance so that he could find out more. Gabriel reported that there was a record that the right to create an account had indeed been knocked out, but the bandits put it up for auction where bidding was held. Moreover, in the area where the guy lived, there were no accessible terminals, and he thought that Ryuki had a supporter, and so he hoped to get more information from the people around him. Garcia was angry because enough time had passed since Ryuki became a no-name, and he simply could not know those with whom he was currently friends. Gabriel told this Garcia that he wasted his time by not providing even a single help, and he considered him a very low person and a player, capable of even selling his friends for profit, even lower in status than no-name. These words hurt Garcia because he really tried to help, and he was angry that Gabriel considered him to be of lower status than the no-name. Pouncing on him from behind, he told Gabriel not to look down on him. Suddenly turning around sharply, Gabriel unexpectedly disarmed the guy and lowered him to the floor. It was an attack of bronze on gold, which was a crime. And since there were many witnesses, he told Garcia not to even think that he would be able to escape punishment. After all, even despite the witnesses, Gabriel could have dealt with him in a different way. By the way, he said that usually the attacker was sentenced to death, but he was going to have mercy on him. Namely, to lower his status to no-name, which sounded extremely creepy for Garcia. After this, the guy began to ask the head of the guild for forgiveness and to give him another chance. After crying, he said that he didn't want to be a no-name because you couldn't think of a worse title. But Gabriel never answered him. Although this guy was a good analyst, he was nothing more and nothing less. Compared to Rinell, he believed that he should have been eliminated. And Gabriel was also of the opinion that there was definitely someone who made this guy so special. And it didn't matter to him what methods he had to use, because he was going to find out the secret of this unknown. This was the same village that Ryuk had visited earlier. One day, the strongest lightning in history struck there. It was Ryuk who arrived there using a rank R teleportation stone. But this feature of movement only worked with this village. The system suddenly decided to ask the master when he will play the gacha. After all, they were just messing around all this time. But Ryuk was on his own wavelength. The guy said that it was not only the size of the village that was important, but also the number of players with access to it. After all, there should be neither too many nor too few. This information was needed for the next step in his plan, because he wanted them to become witnesses. After all, the number of views has increased dramatically since he showed his face. Unable to ignore this, Lindsay will begin to act openly. He was competing with the highest guild and the creators of WAP, and for the ace Lindsay, Ryuk was going to set a small trap. But still, the guy returned to the question about the random boxes of the system and answered that it was time to play gacha. This time he did not go unnoticed because more and more people noticed him because they watched those same videos from the dungeons. And since there were recently rumors about No Name, many believed that this guy just decided to show off to them. And some believed that it was not worth approaching him at all because it could be a trap. Then Ryuki decided to look at his login bonuses and weekly missions, of which there were quite a lot. Namely, 92 Yuguan tickets and 5 SR rank tickets, as well as about 9,000 RP points. The guy decided not to waste time on trifles and immediately start with 10 random boxes. As was customary, he didn't get any legendaries, not even one SR. The system believed that they had no likelihood of influencing this. But despite this, the guy continued to spin the boxes. But since he only got N rank garbage, he was furiously disappointed. Since the drop rate for SR rank items was 3 and 6%, he thought that he would get at least a couple of items. The system asked its master not to despair, because no matter how bad the world was, as long as he was alive, everything would definitely be fine. With which Ryuki agreed, and he said that he didn't expect anything at all. After all, he still had 5 SR rank tickets, and they were his favorites. The first item he got out of the box was the SR rank Phoenix Feather. Thanks to him, it was possible to be reborn once. The guy liked that this could save his life. Since he had no level and status correction, he could die even from one blow. Therefore, he was glad for such a gift. But that was just the beginning because he had 4 more boxes. Ryuki was hoping that he would get a weapon or some skill, but he got an SR rank electric toothbrush, and then the system loudly shouted that it was a success. She told the master that he was incredible, because he constantly received ordinary brushes and finally knocked out SR rank. Laughing through tears, the guy thought it was some kind of joke, and perhaps this brush had hidden skills. The system responded with pathos that there was a star on the item, and it was a special brush that could be used in the real world. But the guy was interested in something other than this garbage information. And then the system said that if he used it, his carries would disappear. In addition, it even ran on batteries, she said in pathos. But Ryuki was angry because this is not what he wanted to hear. The guy understood that, for that matter, the remaining items should have been used all at once. He believed that this could increase the chance of something worthwhile. He confidently decided to do this, after which he opened the remaining 3 boxes. Ryuki prayed that this was a weapon he could use. He got 3 identical objects, namely exactly the same swords and pistols, which really upset him, because what were the chances of getting 3 identical items at the same time? Falling to his knees, he gathered a huge audience that did not understand what was happening. Only one vacuum cleaner, shaking from side to side, laughed so much that its battery almost swelled. The players standing behind were already thinking of reporting the strange behavior of the guild's no-name Lindsay. The vacuum cleaner told the guy that he had a lot of fun with him, so she wanted to tell him something good, which immediately interested him. She said that by duplicating items of SR and higher, he achieved the conditions for unlocking the synthesis system. There were also several other unopened systems, but she could not tell him the conditions for unlocking them in advance. Therefore, she asked to apply her strength and do it on her own. The guy was wondering why she was laughing then. And she replied that she had a fetish for when her master failed, and she hoped someday to renounce it. The guy figured this out. Then he had to understand what the synthesis system was doing. He realized that if he received the same box points, he could combine them for something more worthwhile. And to begin the synthesis of the pistol sword, he needed 10 ordinary N-rank blades. And for more valuable weapons, only 5 R-rank swords were needed. When he did this, he received an improved version of the SR-rank sword pistol. He was glad about this, but still he was wondering if there were any restrictions. Then the system said that there was none. But he should have added either 20 ordinary N-rank swords or 10 R-rank swords with the addition of 2 pistol swords to obtain a rare blade. The guy did it. He managed to do it. He was glad about the plague. After all, after crafting that sword, he managed to get an SR-rank pistol sword, EG, of the bayonet sword type, the shape of which compressed 3 energies per cylinder. After that, Ryuk was really happy, and looking at him, the system was worried about such a mental state. Now the guy just had to upgrade his remaining skills, such as improving his parry from level 4 to level 5, so that he becomes SR Yuguan with a maximum level parry. But suddenly Ryuk became curious. What would happen if you combined Yuguan's parrying and Yuguan's sword skills? Then he was shown a skill synthesis list that showed SR level Holy Sword, SR level Heavenly Blade, and SR level Sword God. Ryuk was unhappy that even here there was a random one, and he demanded that the system tell him which sword he could get. But in response, the vacuum cleaner asked, "Didn't the master get a thrill from it?" After all, with the help of skill synthesis, he could further improve his initial skills and acquire stronger ones. Just like there were other ranks, for example, Super. Ryuk wondered what his probability was. Then the system replied that it was 2%, but that was quite a lot. Then the guy realized that he was stupid when he asked the vacuum cleaner a question. He decided to take a chance and received a rank 1 SR Holy Sword, which had the ability to automatically activate a 3rd level Sword Master and activate a 3rd level Aura. The Holy Sword wasn't such a bad reward, but the guy thought it looked like a combination of ordinary skills. And then he noticed that his skill level had dropped. And then the system said that there was also a random one, which infuriated the guy. But either way, he knew the stage was set. But he wondered why Yuguan was so slow-witted in his experiments. While the guy was indignant, someone snuck up behind him. Seeing this, the system screamed. But it was already too late, and some stranger put a sword to the guy and asked if he was Ryuki, 7017. The guy was as calm as possible, and decided to find out if Lindsay had really sent him to him. But that stranger was insistent, and was only waiting for an answer to his question. Ryuki said that he pointed a weapon at a person in the village, where it was prohibited. After which the stranger still injured him, which the guy did not expect. Looking at Ryuk, he told him that these were just settings, which were made so that the players could not kill each other. In other words, It was possible to inflict pain that would not lead to death. After that, the guy said that this was the only way Lindsay acted. And this method was good, because the pain was felt as in reality. The guy believed that the mask was of no use, because it was clear to him who sent him. After all, as soon as he declared war on Lindsay, he was immediately attacked. And while he was saying this, the stranger attacked him again, piercing him with his blade. And then he said that he should have been on his guard from the moment war was declared. After all, wherever he was, wherever he went, they were going to pursue him and constantly attack. But despite the fact that the guy was wounded, he simply mocked. The stranger did not understand such strange behavior and asked what was wrong with him. Ryuki then replied that he couldn't help but laugh because WAP was Lindsay's property. That's why they could do something so bold. The stranger said that it was not time to laugh because he was going to turn his laughter into a scream, after which he immediately attacked the guy, but he deftly dodged due to his sprinting skill. And then he got close to the stranger, presenting his sword to him. And then he started laughing right in his face, what greatly surprised the stranger. Then Ryuki said that it was the number of preemptive attacks without which the system of a player attacked by a malicious guild would be ideal. Here, the stranger pretended not to understand what was going on. At this time, Ryuki said that it was his turn to attack, and the players standing behind were shocked by what they saw, because this guy easily knocked over this stranger despite his injuries. He asked the stranger, where was the pathos with which he attacked him? After all, a couple of minutes ago he threatened him, but in response the guy heard only a moo. He understood that the stranger was experiencing violent sensations similar to what he felt from him, since the WAP defense system simultaneously reduced health and pain damage, but it influenced his attacks, which impressed the Wanderer. The system told the guy that it had just blocked all exit signals from the village's system. And Ryuk told the Wanderer that, as he said, it was impossible to kill in a forbidden location, but you could still feel endless pain from continuous attacks. Although why would he say this? After all, these guys already knew this, because they themselves had done the same thing up to this point. Suddenly the system said in the master's ear that they were here, namely, the rest of the Lindsay Guild players who surrounded the guy from all sides. After which they gave a final warning to Ryuk on 7017. The players politely asked him to leave the WAP system, and hoped that this guy would leave his playing career. And if he does not resist, they promised to make concessions on this issue. Ryuki didn't understand. What the hell are concessions? After all, they contradicted themselves. In addition, he himself attacked him first, although Ryuk was silent. Guild player Lindsay believed that this guy had no mercy, although he heard that Ryuki was dangerous, but did not expect that so. The guy was tired of this talk and he told them to leave quickly. But in response, I heard from the players that it didn't work that way. And first of all, they noticed a sword gun, which should not be in the WAP dimension. And they wanted to know how he brought it into the world? Ryuki said that as soon as he took off his mask, he would tell him. And then he laughed because he knew that he could not do this. The player said that it was probably just a bug anyway, and he just wanted to enjoy the game and the little joys. And he didn't understand why he would deliberately get into trouble. And then he said that he was very sorry, but his escape story would end there. And then he ordered his players to attack the guy from all sides. Ryuki understood that everything would come to this, so he began to deftly shorten himself from countless attacks at once. The player realized that the guy was too fast, but that was all. Ryuk then used his new Holy Blade SR plus Yuguan. This surprised the player because the guy, before he even reached the tower, began to use the aura of the sword, which used a lot of mana, which was hard for him to believe since using such skills at such an early stage was rare. Looking at the guy, he thought, is this the same newcomer who caused the error? Moreover, he could cope with such an aura, which he had to cope with. Having struck it, he saw a bright spark. Looking at the guy's agility up close, he doubted that it was really the aura that was destroying his sword. In the end, he was unable to cope with such an influx of force, and he simply flew to the side, considering it impossible, because how did this guy manage to do this? The player couldn't have imagined this, since Rook had the same skill as parrying, and he thought it was worth waiting for its effects to wear off. Ryuki decided to assume that the player must have thought about prolonging the battle. But he told him that he did not fully understand the whole situation. After all, his skills did not consume mana, which he proudly announced. The players definitely didn't expect this. And Ryuk told them that if they wanted a long battle, then in principle it suited him, since it could serve as a little training. Since until now, the guy had only fought against monsters and he would like to practice with someone, which surprised the guild player Lindsay. just like other players of lower ranks. At that moment, Ryuki attacked one of the players and he fell to the ground, indicating that this guy pretty much hit his hand, what their leader didn't like, and he told them not to let this guy attack them because he could ignore the defense. Afterwards, the leader asked all the squad members to gather. And at that moment, Ryuk saw Erendite, Grand Saber, even the dark moonlit night. These were all famous weapons, which meant that after taking out his favorite sword, the leader of the players was no longer going to hide his identity. After all, the guy knew his name well, double swordsman, Cassius. The image of a handsome man and a gentleman, and although he was not as good as Rinell, he had a fan club. And it was not clear to Ryuk how he was going to ruin his reputation like this, which greatly angered double swordsman Cassius, and he ordered the guy not to move. At that moment, he activated his chains of illusion against the guy, and since physical attacks were prohibited, double swordsman Cassius ordered his squad to attack with ranged attacks, after which they used the power of magic such as Magnum Shot, Rapid Lightning, and Dragon's Breath. The players realized that they had figured out the guy's parry skill, and now it was necessary to immediately hit him with all attacks. They were sure that he would definitely not be able to cope with this, because he was shackled with magical chains. But as Ryuk expected, the SR plus Divine Blade was not just for show, and the system said that thanks to his strength, he could cause damage not even to a physical object. And although this was a little disappointing for Ryuk, because he was thinking about countermeasures for long-range attacks, but simply swinging the sword, everything worked out by itself. Looking at this, the leader of the squad used obscene language, and then, with disappointment, he ordered all participants to attack again. How suddenly, after a couple of seconds, he fell to the ground, and only the surprised voices of the participants could be heard asking if everything was okay with him. After all, this was the first time the captain caught a bullet, and he didn't have the feeling that he was defeating the boss with one blow, like before. When the other participants saw the guy's weapon, they were surprised, since this simply couldn't have happened. It wasn't in the WAP system. But no matter how you look at it, it was still a trigger, which could hold back a bunch of big monsters, but if the enemy was a person, then that's a completely different story. Firearms did not exist in WAP, and even the elite were unable to handle them. And Ryuk was curious. Why would these be Lindsay's guild players? The guy said, since they attacked him first, they would die from pain or shock. Then, he began to implement what he had in mind. And at this time, one of the guilds watched all this in horror, believing that this could not happen, blaming everything on the fact that it was a mistake, otherwise how to explain it. But still it became more and more interesting for them. The system reported that these people's evasion and defense depended on status, so there were too many loopholes in their movements. What was their difference from the master, who was always on the verge of life and death? She also said that she blocked them from logging out of the system, which was a pity, because they couldn't run away from the pain. The guy understood that in any case they were the best players in the Lindsay Guild, and they had safety devices for mental protection. Suddenly, the guy saw a bright light high in the sky, and then a strong lightning strike struck right next to him. The guy realized that this was someone's skill. Previously, he had to watch it on video so often that he was even tired of it. And if you do not master the skill of the spear, then it will be impossible to study it. In WAP, this was one of the rare long-range skills. And then he saw a meteor shower with his own eyes. This could only mean one thing, namely, a metastatic stone that could transport to another dimension, which is exactly what happened, and the guy simply disappeared in the middle of the village, and the players of a lower rank stood in bewilderment at what happened. They couldn't believe it was Lindsay in person. Even the head of the detachment was surprised that he decided to come to them personally. And at this time, appearing in another place, Ryuki had to run away from a strong source of energy. And as soon as he was at a safe distance, he realized who had decided to visit him. Appearing in front of the guy, Rinell said that it was unpleasant, of course, but he didn't happen to have a gallery filled with his photos. Then he said that since the love calls did not stop, he simply could not sit quietly at home. He was curious. Did the guy want to cause him trouble with such actions? The system suddenly noticed that the master's heartbeat had suddenly increased. All because Ryuki had imagined this moment many times. He asked Rinell to answer only one question. Did he recognize him? Surprised, Rinell replied that he did not remember him, and it seemed to him that he just wanted to attract his attention. And although he came there to look and remember him, he still could not remember this no-name. Rinell wondered if this guy was really mad at him. Ryuki was surprised that Rinell did not remember the one whose life he destroyed. Rinell asked to wait, saying the guy's name many times. Suddenly, exclaiming, He said with a grin that he didn't remember that. He asked the guy, "What is it?" Was he disappointed? Upset? And then I wanted to know if he really thought that if he behaved like that, his heart would ache. Rinell believed that the guy was just trying to blame others for his misfortune, that's all. However, since he had come such a long way, he asked the guy not to disappoint him. Ryuki asked him not to worry because he did not need his leniency. After which, taking his spear powered by mana, Rinell began to approach the guy. Ricky was quite surprised at such speed, but still the guy was able to dodge his attack, which was very useful, since after activation Rinell released a powerful energy stream of magic. Then he was amused by the fact that the guy managed to dodge. He said that he would ignore it and absolutely destroy the guy, even if he was a no-name. Looking at how Rinell's attack destroyed everything in its path, the guy was extremely surprised by its power. Did he think he could move on to the next attack? After which he entered into a battle with the deputy of the guild, in which everything sparkled and blazed. The guy was surprised because it was just the power of Rinell's usual attack, and his speed was so high that he could not even grasp the moment to parry and just did what he did as he tried to intuitively block his blows. Suddenly Rinell threw the guy aside with a slight movement of his hand, after which he said something about changing his mind, but Ryuki didn't understand what he was talking about. Rinell said that for him it was just a little fun, since recently games have become a place to get magic stones, because people used to like to play them for fun. And the fact that the no-name was so weak that he was simply going to evaluate his abilities. Nevertheless, having come face to face, he wanted to understand what this guy was hiding, and he asked me to entertain him a little. And swinging and accumulating mana into his spear, he told Ryuk to try to get a high score. After all, he used his first-class Star Strike skill against him. Ryuk felt at that moment as if his wrist had broken. But still, he somehow managed to block this powerful blow, which surprised him. This was all thanks to his SR plus Holy Sword Yuguan, which had a level 3 parry skill. And then he realized that when the parry was activated for a moment, he had a small chance, and it could not be missed. But Rinell was getting closer and closer to him, and each of his usual attacks threw the guy several meters back, preventing him from attacking each other. Ryuk was surprised that, having lost his balance, he immediately counterattacked, and his attack was stronger than that of the Dark Knight. Parrying such a skill was not in WoP, and Rinell understood that the guy was using funny things. But he didn't mind playing with him a little more, but he politely asked the guy not to break. And then he immediately attacked him with his spear, and then Ryuki realized that there was no doubt that the effect of the parry was working. But the difficult task was that Rinell had 2 fast transitions between attacks. And when the guy saw the effect of Rinell's weapon, he was sure that he had used the same material when he was an analyst. Rinell suddenly told the guy to concentrate, as it would be even faster further. He used the skill of the unique item Star Spear. And Ryuki understood that the more he attacked, the greater the speed. And although he had intuition and parry, it was a fuck-up. As soon as the guy saw the right moment, he began to attack. He realized that an opportunity had arisen, and he should act immediately. When suddenly Rinell pierced him with his spear with words about what a disappointment it was. And if he could hold out for another 3 seconds, he would have broken the record. After all, the guy wasn't so good that he would remember him. But on the plus side, he had at least a little fun fighting him. After that, he let him go, and the guy from high fell to the ground. Rinell considered this the end, and said that the guy disappointed him, and then asked him not to provoke him with such pathetic abilities. And even if he wanted to die, nothing would have happened. After all, just like in the village where he fought with Cassius, this place also had a forbidden gaming zone. And no matter how you look, there is not a single person there, but only ruins. The system was so stupid that it recognized it as a village. But in any case, Rinell could not leave the game at that moment. And he wanted to know, didn't the guy at that moment have the same force that supported him behind the scenes? And Ryuk replied that he wouldn't tell, but if he was so interested, he could ask Cynthia about it. Then Rinell was surprised to hear her name from the no-name, and he asked him if he knew where this girl was. This became a reason for a smile on the guy's face, and then he asked, was he also betrayed? But this only angered him, and he began to demand that the guy lay out everything he knows and not miss a single detail. Taking out the object, Ryuk realized that for the first time, his intuition screamed so loudly. And while Rinell wanted to find out where this amateur was, Ryuk threw his small blinding R-rank flash drive. It was so bright that it made Rinell lose his thoughts. I would say a good layout for mid. Rinell was surprised and wanted to know what it was, but then he devalued it, calling it garbage. Suddenly, Ryuki laughed, because he thought that someone else took advantage of Rinell as funny news. He also said that he was going to knock all the juice out of him, and there was no need for him to borrow someone else's help. Rinell liked that the guy was not going to beg for mercy there, but he warned the guy not to regret after that he had missed his chance. Ryuki said since he didn't remember him, he was going to make sure he never forgot him. After all, until this moment, he had not fought even 50%. The system was surprised by such a statement. Rinell was surprised that the no-name had time to say such absurd things, and the system asked the master not to regret it later, and the guy assured her that this would not happen. After all, he had long said goodbye to these useless emotions. Rinell was funny. He began to attack Ryuk again, and this time, he did not plan to spare him. The guy wanted to read his attacks with the intuition skill and buy himself some time. When he saw Rinell attack again, he activated the skill. But something went wrong, and a shockwave of incredible force was formed. Ryuki did not at all expect that during his skill, Rinell would be able to switch to an attack. Suddenly, before you even had time to move away from the previous time, the blade of Rinell's spear was again approaching the guy. This time he managed to read the attack and stop it with force. Rinell was glad that they were in the restricted area. After all, despite the fact that this guy managed to get to a point where everything ended too quickly and he was wondering if it upset the guy, but he had no time for that at that moment, because he felt as if his right arm would be torn off. If he had dodged it a little later, he would have lost a limb. Rinell said that if they were in an ordinary village, the situation would be different. He really liked this place because it was quiet there and it was easy to engage in battles. Ryuk was annoyed by his speech and asked him to shut up, and then using his sprint skill, he ended up behind Rinell. But he only grinned at the fact that the guy considered himself skillful because it was not so. Turning around, he sharply repelled his attack, and with such force that Ryuki could not have expected. And then he told the guy that he would show something interesting. Namely, the first-class meteor shower skill, and this time there was much more mana there. And the guy also received more damage. Rinell asked the guy if he thought it was a bit weak. After all, earlier he said that he would fight at 50%, but it seemed to him that this was the end. Or did the guy think that because he was the ace of the guild, he would be able to troll him? He asked him to show at least a little of that courage and continue the battle, because this would be a great chance to take revenge. Rinell had already become disappointed in him, because such a battle was not based on equality of strength. He didn't wait for the no-name to get up, so he simply threw him up with his magic. And then he said that it would end shamefully for him, and perhaps he wanted to play some more. But since there was no answer, Rinell used his first-class meteor shower skill, and then a flash of light penetrated the guy. After a long flight, Ryuki landed on the ground, and Rinell was already celebrating his victory. Suddenly, she was interrupted by a call from his brother Gabriel Darius, who asked to stop fighting and quickly return to the guild. This call tensed Rinell. He did not expect to be absent for so long, and he understood that he would receive a hat for this. Ryuk saw that he was already leaving, so the guy shouted for him to stay, which alarmed and surprised Rinell because he did not expect that his attacks could not penetrate the guy's armor. Ryuki understood that if the pain he was inflicted on was real, he would have already died from shock. Even if he survived, that didn't mean he couldn't escape the consequences. But this was not a problem that could be solved by strength of spirit. The system reported that sensitivity adjustments controlled sensations. So she set the threshold to 50% of the minimum value. As a result, his movements became slower, and she wanted to remove it. She thought he was truly crazy since he decided to enjoy the pain. After all, it was truly dangerous. But Ryuki said that he had no other choice. He had to take advantage of every chance. There was no other way but to constantly clash with each other. Rinell was extremely impressed that this happened again. He wanted to know what kind of bug it was. He told the guy that it would be better if he didn't get up. But he only asked if he was afraid of Gabriel Darius. And what did he send him? But then Ryuki remembered that Rinell was an ordinary pawn, because he would hardly have decided to come to him himself, and he supposed that Gabriel must have been very angry, like a raging fire. After these words, the guy took out his rank N rusty dagger. Rinell thought that Ryuki was in complete despair, so he allowed him to say whatever he wanted. When suddenly the guy's sword flashed near his neck with great speed, and then there was a scream. Then Ryuki asked with a grin if he had lost his vigilance. And then the guy asked not to scream like that just because he got a small scratch. But if this was the first time this happened to him, then he congratulated him on it. He noted that no matter how effective the armor was in reducing injury and pain, his attacks did not follow these rules. Rinell could not stand it and called the guy a bad word. Then he assumed that it made him angry? But Ryuki asked not to worry, because he still had many such gifts. Then the guy began to tease him by luring him with his finger and talking about an attack, which worked perfectly, after which the embittered Rinell began to attack. But this time he failed as Ryuk began to dominate. What surprised him, he didn't understand how this guy began to read his attacks. After all, he must have been seriously injured, but what happened? The guy said that when he was an analyst, he studied Rinell's style until he lost his pulse in order to improve his strategies, mainly the patterns he used for combat. And he even predicted the behavior of habits in battle. And at that moment, the guy learned that Rinell had never experienced such pain. And his only mistake was that he lost concentration. Rinell was pretty exhausted due to his injury, and he wanted to finish the fight as soon as possible. Therefore, having splashed out the magic, he was going to finish everything with one blow. I immediately used such skills as supersonic sonic attack acceleration, super strong knuckles attack enhancement, double one-time damage, 7 stars for increasing critical strike, and all the techniques he had previously used only to attack the boss. This made Ryuk happy, because he was waiting for the moment when Rinell would start using his special skills. He could only shorten and stay further from the restricted zone of the Republic of Kazakhstan, which was quite easy to do in such an open area. Rinell began to chase him and say that he could not escape, but the guy decided to use his N rank items and throw them away along the way, thereby delaying Rinell. After all, if he could not avoid the attack, then he should have reduced the damage of the attack. Therefore, he threw away all the garbage that fell out of the gacha, which annoyed Rinell. And while catching up, he shouted after him that with such methods, he would not be able to stop his attack, because it only made him angry and melted even more power within him. And realizing that the spear was scratching his back, the guy was not happy. Having delivered a strong attack with his superpowers, Rinell said that the guy had already gotten him, and that he probably wanted to avoid a direct hit. But what was his chance of victory now? Rinell asked. Ryuki, on the contrary, was delighted and grabbed the spear and said that this was his chance. Then, enraged, Rinell told this no-name not to stain his spear with his blood, and the guy said that he would show him something interesting now. While Rinell said not to talk nonsense and quickly remove his hands, the guy pulled out his first SSR that day, after which Serial experimented with feathers, and in the video he cheated a little by calling it a skill. In fact, it was a skill and not a subject. Therefore, holding the spear in the guy's hands, it began to shine with a bright flame, which caused misunderstanding among Rinell, because it began to dissolve into small particles. This was all thanks to the guy's SSR removal system, and Rinell's spear simply disintegrated right in his hands, which surprised him very much because he had never seen anything like this. This rare thing even disappeared from his inventory. There were no such item destruction systems in WoP, so he wondered why his weapon was missing. He assumed it was a hallucination skill and that this guy had done something. At this time, Ryuki held him at gunpoint, and then he attacked with his pistol blade straight at him. The guy said that he was aiming for the heart, but as it turned out, he had a good reaction, like an ace. Rinell just wanted to know what he did with his weapon. Ryuki told him that he didn't realize the situation he was in, because the weapon he was proud of no longer existed in this world because its data was erased. This was the concept of delete. And to use this skill, you only had to touch the target for more than 5 seconds. The only limitation was that you could use this skill 4 times a week. Rinell didn't know what the trick was, but he was sure that defeating the guy would solve the problem. The guy started ticking and told Rinell to catch him, which made him angry. And he said that he would catch this scoundrel and that he would not live. Suddenly, while catching up with the guy, something went wrong and an explosion occurred. Rinell didn't understand what was going on. And then, the flash touched him too, causing damage to him. At that moment, Ryuki said that it would be better for him not to make unnecessary movements, because there he planted many more similar devices, which surprised Rinell. The guy said that he didn't hear it because there were traps everywhere, which is why he lured him there. Ryuk asked if Rinell thought that he did not know about this place, but he only began to express obscene language in response. Ryuki said that he had calculated everything in advance, namely how he would appear in front of him, where he would try to kill him, and so on. All after, he declared war on them in that video. So he was well aware of this tawdry playground of Lindsay fools like him, and he assumed that Rinell would take him there. So he prepared a small gift for him. Therefore, the guy was glad that everything worked exactly as he expected, and now it was his turn to play with him. Rinell was annoyed that the guy was laughing at him, and he decided to attack him again. Suddenly, all the traps were activated, and a strong flash occurred. Rinell didn't like this guy more and more because, in addition to the damage, he couldn't find him because of the dust. And when he saw a shadow in this thick pile of smoke, he immediately attacked straight to the head. How surprised Rinell was when he realized that it was a skull, but not the current at which he was aiming. As it turned out, Ryuki again set up a trap to grab his weapon. After 5 seconds, it began to disappear again. Rinell was surprised that this guy managed to do this trick again and deprive him of his second weapon. He realized that this was no ordinary trick, and that the star spear could no longer be used. At this time, while he was thinking, Ryuki pointed his blade at him, and then he used the trigger and attacked Rinell. Calling him a scoundrel, Rinell said that he would take revenge on him. At that second, Rinell began to leave this dimension, but something went wrong and the system crashed. And then Ryuki managed to pierce him with his blade, and Rinell still couldn't understand why he couldn't get out? All because Yuguan had previously blocked his exit system. Ryuki began to cringe at the fact that the guild ace Lindsay wanted to disappear so shamefully, and then he put his hand on his face and said his name, while he, in horror, did not understand why he could not get out. The guy said he used to be an analyst for Lindsay's guild and he wanted to know if he remembered him, but Rinell said that he had no reason to remember this, because it was too meaningless information. After this, Ryuki asked, even if after this he cannot be a player? What Rinell didn't quite understand was what this guy was talking about. Ryuki then explained that usually one player only had one account, and if a player lost his account for some reason, he could never get it again. And some time ago he had a question. Can the delete skill really destroy account data? Ryuki wanted him to remember him well, since he couldn't remember who he was before. But Rinell only told him to remove his hand. Then the guy started counting down the time, which started at 5. Then he said the number 4, and Rinell yelled at him to stop. Then the guy said the number 3. And then Rinell began to remember how his brother had previously asked to collect information about Ryuk 7017 before his expulsion, who asked him to act carefully as he had a bad feeling. And then Ryuk said the number 1, and at that moment something rang in Rinell's ear. And he said that he understood everything and asked not to give him any more lectures, but then Ryuki said the number 0. With his last words, Rinell asked him to stop, but it was already too late and his body, under the guy's arms, simply disappeared. After which the system informed the master that everything was over and that he had done a good job. But Ryuki at that moment was surprised that this was the end. He was even angry that everything happened so quickly. And after a few seconds he relaxed, because he realized that everything had just begun. After all, there was 1 or 2 more people with whom he needed to deal. And when he said that one of them was Gabriel Darius, someone was hiding behind him. And he took out his very strange blade from under his robe. After which he went towards the guy celebrating his victory. Ricky couldn't do anything when he touched him. The guy just thought, where could the dagger come from in this world? After which he appeared in another dimension and then the system asked if the master was okay? But the guy was only thinking where the teleportation could come from and who set this trap in the portal. Suddenly behind him, he heard words that they had not seen each other for a long time. Then a portal appeared from which a man came out who called his name. And the guy wondered who it was. This person introduced himself as Arca from the Gaze Guild. Ryuki wondered if this was the guy from the guild that made the top record in the dungeon. The man said that his real name was Arca, but there was another name that he had used before, which perhaps it could have been familiar to him before. Having lowered her hood, the girl said that she thought that they would never see each other again. When Ryuki saw this girl, he was in complete shock. He didn't expect her to find him herself. After all, this is the same sweet girl who was in his guild and helped him. The guy could not imagine that Cynthia would find him herself. As she said earlier, it was a fake name. And her real name? Having interrupted her, the guy started laughing so hard that he almost fell off his feet. Having said rudely that he didn't care about her present. After all, she set him up, which is why he was expelled from the guild and made a no-name. And then she appeared in front of him, and no matter how much he thought about the reason, only one thing came to his mind. The fact that Cynthia, or whoever she was, should have followed in Rinell's footsteps. The girl said that she followed his whereabouts but never thought that he would become a player. The guy said that he and Rinell were the bastards from Lindsay, and that he was always thinking about how to deal with them. If he had not had such a goal, he would have died long ago as they wanted. The girl chose to remain silent and say nothing on this topic. The guy asked the girl to better say why she decided to appear in front of him. Afterwards, Rook admitted that he was desperately holding back so as not to do to her the same thing as to Rinell. The girl admitted that he was very different from who he was 3 years ago. And she told him this. that he needed to forget the past and stop taking revenge on Lindsay. With a grin, the guy asked in surprise, "Why?" Then the girl said that if he remained silent, then Lindsay's participants would do the same too. He also should have thought about his family because she only found out that day that his mother was no longer there, after which she asked for forgiveness. Hearing this, Ryuki was shocked. The guy did not expect to hear such news. He understood that the girl seemed impatient to repeat Rinfel's fate, and if so, he was ready to fulfill her wish. He decided not to hesitate and do it right away. After all, there was a confined space and there was nowhere to run. Therefore, he could easily attack her. But the girl had special agility and was able to dodge. And then she ran to her blade, and this made the guy wonder if he had some kind of secret. The girl managed to run and grab her blade, but Ryuki had speed. He got ahead of the girl and grabbed her blade. Then he swung his weapon to attack her. This attack was enough to ensure that she had the same future as Rinell. But surprisingly, after the guy deprived her of her head, she told him not to think that this was the end. After all, she had never imagined before that he could complicate her task. This made the guy think, because it seemed that he had struck her down. But no, how did that happen? He didn't understand what it was. Appearing again, the girl said that she did not intend to fight him. And she did not think that the victory on Rinell was purely an accident. The guy got angry and decided to do it again. But he failed. And the girl said that she did not intend to kill him. But she did not expect that he would be able to defeat Rinell. Suddenly, the system warned the master that it was a lie. After all, when this player touched the dagger, a lot of data was transmitted, and the guy did not understand what it was about. Even though they were criticized for all sorts of insults, such as bugs and cheats, when they finally saw the real thing, they became too resilient. But it was a man-made mistake. Rikyu said that he did not care about such explanations, but in any case, the guy understood that he could not deal with her at that moment. The girl said her goal was to destroy Lindsay, and although she didn't know what trick he used, she wondered if Ryuki would be able to cope with Rinell when he came to life. After that, the guy grinned maliciously, and then he said that he would not stop taking revenge, and it did not matter what awaited him in the future. The girl believed that he would regret it, but the guy said that Rinell would never appear in the maze again, because he deleted his account and he even cried. The girl asked to explain what this meant, but the guy asked to remain silent, or he would do exactly the same to her. After these words, the guy reappeared in the place where the battle with Rinell took place, with the words that they had caught him. He didn't know if it was a mistake or something similar, but if their goal was to attack, then he believed that he had failed. Also, because the girl had that unknown dagger. He didn't know if that contact with him was a trigger condition. Ryuki thought he shouldn't have touched it. What was strange was that he didn't feel any discomfort from it. However, the guy wanted to find out more information and find an ally. Ryuki wondered if Yuguan had finished what they discussed earlier. To which he replied to the master that he had finished. Reverse data discovery and connection has been completed. What made the guy happy? After which he asked if the creator of the mod had heard him. The bear didn't understand how the guy managed to get in touch with him. The guy said that he knew that he installed a backdoor in the mod that he bought on the black market, and also that he managed to hack his vision for espionage. The bear was surprised that the guy managed to notice this, and he wanted to immediately close this access. But the guy told him that it was useless, and then asked a question. Didn't he see how Rinell and Kazus could not log out of the system? The modder said that he was very sorry and that he had no ill intentions, but Ryuki said that he didn't care whether it was malicious or not. He wanted to know, even though it was just a test, was he going to control it? But the bear did not know what to say from shock. Then the guy asked to show him his face for a minute, and then he could forgive him. He told him to come to Yorozuya tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. But if it doesn't exist, it will delete all of its data, which scared the mod creator. He understood the guy and decided to ask him one question. He was wondering when he was fighting Rinell. For a moment, the signal disappeared and the bear wanted to know if it was his doing. The guy at that moment was thinking that he could not sense Cynthia when she was close to him, and he considered this a too dangerous bug. That's why he wanted to deal with her. And he asked the bear if he was able to ask such questions. And then he told him that if he didn't want to become like Rinell, then he should have kept quiet and not caused him trouble. This evening, a guy came to a merchant in Yorozuya with the words that he was offended because despite the fact that he came, the bear did not appear. And he was wondering if the merchant was ready to make a deal with him. Jutenko did not understand what the guy meant. After all, the creator of the mod was already there, didn't he see? Jutenko asked. Ryuk said that he was not in the mood to joke, and if he was hiding something, then he should have revealed it all at once. when suddenly he heard words from the creator that he was there. It was the bear who told him that he was the creator of the mods, and was glad to have such a meeting. When the guy saw this toy, he thought it was some kind of joke. When he grabbed him, he told him that there was no need to be angry anymore because he could start all over again. But the bear asked the guy not to press so hard because he could break him. Ryuki asked him not to worry, because it wouldn't come to that. Suddenly, the guy saw that Jutenko was lying seemingly unconscious, and I wondered what was going on. Then the mod creator replied that he should have just shown him everything directly instead of explaining it, because that's why he didn't move his body for a while. And the person who was talking to him at that moment was the creator of the mod. His name was Suzuki5555. And earlier Jutenko was talking to him, and he was wondering if it was time for the guy to let him go in order to make a deal. Ryuki noticed that the bear's voice had changed dramatically, and he was curious. Who was behind this? The system reported that there was no doubt that they were the same creature. It turned out that you can programmatically control your personality, using multiple full-body prosthetics. Ryuki wanted to know why he bothered so much about his personality then. Jutenko noticed that his visitor was indeed very perceptive and that he did not look like the prosthetic body from last time. But before they got down to business, Suzuki wanted to congratulate him on his victory over Rinell. But still he was curious. How did the guy get such an ability? Ryuki noticed that the bear's voice changed each time. Was it that Suzuki45? He told the bear that he did not have to answer him, and first he wanted him to reveal his true identity. Suzuki admitted that this was a better explanation than his, and he believed that the removal skill needed to be hidden from prying eyes. The guy thanked him for the advice, but it was already too late. Suddenly, the system reported that the video editing had been completed, namely, the video of the fight with Rinell. The guy believed that the video of their fight was posted uneducated. Suzuki was surprised by the guy's statement. He thought he was crazy, and then asked if he didn't realize that Lindsay would gather all her strength to attack him. The guy replied that this was exactly what he wanted, because in this way Lindsay would show everyone that they were afraid of the no-names, whom they looked down on. Suzuki wondered if this even made sense. After all, the guy was already at gunpoint. Ryuki didn't quite understand what he meant, but the bear asked him to stop because he didn't want to talk about unpleasant things. Jutenko told the guy that for Suzuki, questions not related to his activities were too troublesome. And then he wanted to show them something interesting, namely, live video that covered a radius of 100 meters. This was a very useful thing for identifying people who were targeting his store. There they saw the people of the Black Mamba, located at a distance of 47 meters from them. Ryuki was surprised that these guys were still there, planning some mischief again. But suddenly he realized that it was an ordinary bait, because these guys were most likely the real employers. Then he saw the Iron Blood people at a distance of 47 meters and wondered who they were. Jutenko said that this is a fairly large organization that makes money from shady dealings in the red light district, and the likelihood that they were dealing with Lindsay was extremely low. After all, the boss left the game a long time ago due to an accident. And there were rumors that Lindsay's guild was involved. Ryuk understood, but he thought it was stupid to explain about the efforts with those who destroyed him. And the guy wanted to know how all this related to the true identity of the merchant. Jutenko said that this should have been discussed in a safer place, because the guy was being followed. Ryuki understood that whether it was Jutenko or Suzuki, each prosthesis had its own purpose, and this was exactly what he needed, because previously he was looking for a partner who would help him achieve his goal. Jutenko said that the store's basement was connected to the entertainment district's sewer system, and they were in a safe place. And after the system scanned this place, Ryuki was convinced of the merchant's words. Having gone deeper, the guy did not understand what was in front of him. And Jutenko said that it was a warehouse where they collected prosthetics and goods. This place contained his greatest masterpieces. The system did not doubt human technology because it was of excellent quality, which it noted. But Ryuk was not interested in such things. Most of all, the guy was interested in what should he call the merchant, Jutenko or Suzuki? The merchant said that he might have called him Suzuki when he was a hacker. But suddenly he realized that most likely words could not convey the whole essence. But anyway, before they made a deal, he wanted to explain who he was. His name was Anonymous, age over 20 years but under 30, gender was female. And unfortunately that was all he knew, which surprised Ryuki, because how could he not know who he was? The guy assumed that he developed schizophrenia due to spending too much time with his personalities. But Ju Tenko, after the guy's assumption, only asked if he knew about the explosion of Boeing 707. People thought it was a plane crash in which no one survived. But in reality, there was only one person left alive, who was a mere lump of coal, unable to identify himself or speak. This guy was operated on in a research lab, and some weirdo fitted him with a full prosthetic. After this story, the system realized what terrible creatures these people really were. Ryuk was wondering if the merchant was the one who survived. Then he said that, to be more precise, it was Vashira. At the time of the accident, all his memories were mixed up. He didn't know the victim's soul or anyone else, but now he was just artificially controlling everyone's personalities, so he didn't know other details. Ruki decided to believe him, and then inquire about what kind of deal he planned to make with him. In response to this, Ju Tenko threw him a book, which Ruki caught, not understanding why he needed it. Suzuki decided to find out if the guy could add him to the Lindsay and Rethia guilds too, and then he asked if they had seen this video of the story of the escape from the depths of the sea in the 6th part, which included a raid on Lindsay's guild and a hunt for Rinfel Darius. Ryuki was wondering, is deleting data not fraud? After all, he saw the uploaded video and it was fake. After all, an unknown fool attacked there hundreds of times, for which Rinfel wanted to sue him. And the deletion skill was a simple fake. And if it's a lie, shouldn't Rinfel just tell the truth? At that very time, Rinfel himself was sitting in his office and drinking drinks. He was angry because he couldn't come to terms with the fact that No Name could trick him like that. And also about the fact that his account was deleted, along with all his accounts. And now, being a No Name, he considered himself a useless brother and ace of the guild. But despite this, he asked his older brother to give him another chance. But he didn't understand how to give it to someone who ignored his warning, went to fight alone, and eventually lost his account. Gabriel told him there would be no more chance in the future. Rinfel admitted that he simply relaxed, for which he regretted, and asked his brother to create a new account for him. He said that from now on, he will do as he says. After all, he was sure that there must be a way, for example, stealing another player's account or the right to create a new one. Darius couldn't believe his brother would say such a thing. He thought it was ignorant. And he was ashamed that they were of the same blood. He then explained that there was typically one account per person, and it was impossible to restore an expired account. After that, he called security and told his brother that it was time for him, and then Darius asked not to bother him anymore. Rinfel considered his brother's words to be untrue, because Newnham also became a player. The guy at that moment was horrified, realizing that this was the end for him. He told the guards to remove their hands because he did not need their help. Darius didn't like this and kicked his brother out because he was tired of listening to his complaints, so he asked him not to come anymore. Rinfel considered this stupidity because Darius could not even look him in the eyes normally at that moment. Suddenly, behind his back, the young man asked for forgiveness and asked if he was Rinfel Darius. He replied that if he was homeless, he could look for another purpose. And even if this was not the case, he had no time for it at that time. But the gentleman only laughed in response, calling Rinfel homeless, and then said that he had arrived to help him. After all, it seemed to him that this guy could use their strength. Showing a photo of Ryuk 7017, the gentleman asked if Rinfel wanted to listen to his story. And while Rinfel was studying the stranger, Ryuki learned from the manual that Lindsay was deliberately delaying progress in the world of fantasy. In return, the game developer Rethia provides special conditions for Lindsay. Yuguan said that with such developers and administrators, it is not surprising that the game is such a mess. Tonko replied that this was a secret pact between Lindsay Guild and Rachia Soft. They want to deliberately stop progress in God's game. Ryuki realized that right now the world was being supported by resources from the labyrinth. Is it really worth taking on monopolists? But Tanko replied that they once led the frontier in the development of God's game, but now they are just an obstacle to the progress of the world. Suzuki's anger at the company was difficult to understand, but he was the only survivor of the 707 explosion incident. That thing that exploded on the plane back then was a game item from Yggdrasil. Ryuki guessed that Tonko was almost sure that Rachia Soft was behind this explosion. If they go after Lindsay, they will go against Rethia too, but even their resources are slowly drying up. Society is stable now, but in 5 to 10 years, Rachia may come up with something new. And those incompetent people will just continue to monopoly the God's game development. God is the reservoir of demons. The main content of WAP remains unconquered. The Lindsay Guild has control and a plan to dominate it. But even Yuguan had a great desire to destroy this plan. Tanko would have supported this idea, but he had a friend's reason for being in this world. Ryuki knew that these were mods, and he also really wanted them. He tested all 13 mouse provided by Wolya, and the disguise mod looked to be useful. Something to think about, but it's a pretty interesting deal. But right now he was interested in one case. Yuguan confirmed that there was record of the Tanko incident, and it is true that only one person survived. However, there is no evidence that Will survived, so this needs to be investigated separately. In the end of the end, it cannot be trusted. And anyway, Will said to go to the back alleys to the district hotel. This place was considered safe, but as soon as the guy climbed out of the hatch, he noticed a strange man sitting on the road. Ryuki thought he was drunk and decided to check how he was feeling. But suddenly the guy noticed something interesting. Yuguan and Ryuki immediately realized that these were digital drugs. And then some voice behind said that they are in trend lately. Moreover, they are easy to find in this pleasure area. Ryuki managed to escape and turn the corner before the strange guys appeared. They were wearing the same clothes as the people near Jukin Square. Ryuki blamed Tanko for everything because he said that this is a safe route. Or did he do it on purpose? But one of the strange people grabbed a man on the road and rhetorically asked whether the effect of this drug was impressive. And then he pushed the stranger aside and he fell. After which he stood up and ordered his guys to drag the poor fellow away. And then he asked if they had really lost their goal. The subordinate began to apologize, but the boss said that Volya is always too careful. Moreover, the client asked for now to just watch him, so you just need to monitor the area. Although on the other hand, observation is unlikely to help, so subordinates must follow all orders. They must make an effort, otherwise the consequences will be dire. Yuguan, watching everything with the master, suddenly said that Will really didn't set a trap for them. But the guy told the system to be silent, not wanting to get into trouble. And then he ordered Yuguan to lead him through the most populated route. So he soon arrived at his destination. All that was left was to pull the handle and enter. The guy thought about it, still not believing in the generosity of Tanko or Volya. Entering the room, he saw a clean bed and a small room. Happy that it was for him. Ryuki collapsed onto the clean sheets. He spent weeks in the labyrinth and didn't even remember when he was in the real world. The guy lay there, relaxing for the first time in a long time. But then he felt someone's presence in the room. At that very second, someone's sword pierced his bed. Ryuki managed to rush to the side at the last moment using a sprint. Now even in this place, he was not safe. Ryuki pulled out his short knife at the last moment and struck the attacker. He rushed to the other side of the room, escaping from the blow. But it was amazing. The enemy seemed to teleport to the window. The attacker just used a special skill, an item from Wigdrizzle, but Ryuki could not let him leave and jumped after the enemy through the window. Having successfully landed, Ryuki began to follow the red tracks. Yuguan said that the enemy uses invisibility and presence concealing, items converted into reality. Without intuition, Ryuki would not have even noticed this, but the system also warned that there were no traps. The tracks lead around the corner, and the guy followed them. Having driven the enemy into a dead end, he shouted that it was useless to run. He turned around and Ryuki asked who sent him to destroy the guy. But the enemy did not respond, raising his sword up and attacking Ryuki in response. He managed to dodge at the last moment, sensing that the enemy was dangerous. He was able to create an entire wall cutting with his weapon. Yuguan was impressed by this because the weapon could cut everything in its path in one blow, but Ryuki replied that the skill of the enemy's sword does not quite coordinate with its power. This means that this is not his main weapon, and he will not allow him to escape, so he grabbed him by the hand. And then he hit him with a sword, saying that he would first see what kind of weapon it was. The sword fell from the hands of the stranger as he tried to escape. Then the weapon's effect wore off, as did its invisibility, revealing the attacker's face. But Ryuki didn't really need this, because he mockingly said that the so-called former guild ace was trying to act like a killer. It is not clear whether Rinell, who was wounded in the arm, was ashamed of this, but he was definitely angry. He shouted curses at the hated Ryuki. He was ready to destroy the guy and rushed for his sword. But before he could take it, he received a blow. Ryuki threw Rinell several meters to the side, and then he picked up his sword and asked, "Isn't this an items of Yggdrasil?" Then where did Rinell get it? He could use the sword's capabilities as the owner, but Ryuki said that such rubbish was enough for Rinell. He looked at Ryuki angrily, calling him a bastard. And then he stood up and, to Ryuki's surprise, simply ran away. But the guy didn't want to miss this opportunity and rushed after him. Rinell was furious but thought he still had a way to win. This monster Ryuki will still dance to his tune. Running out into a crowded place, Rinell realized that it didn't matter how strong this guy was because he was still a no-name. People on the street immediately recognized Rinell and noticed blood on his hand. And when they saw Ryuki with a sword in his hands, they were surprised at this object. And then everyone recognized the famous Ryu-701 from the video. Everyone knew about his victory over Rinell in the game, but did not expect that they would fight in reality. Rinell shouted, "How dare a no-name threaten the Golden Boss? This is a crime committed in front of a bunch of witnesses. His excuses won't carry any legal weight, so what is he going to do now?" Then Ryuki threw the sword on the ground and suddenly said to arrest him. This surprised Rinell, but Ryuki said that it was strange that the Golden Boss attacked a no-name, which means it was self-defense on Ryuki's part. And if Rinell destroys him, then he will be innocent. If he can do it, of course. But Rinell understood that he would not do anything in front of witnesses. But Rinell had options, but Ryuki's behavior was as if he was up to something. But Rinell, in front of all these cameras, could pay for humiliation in the game. And then, having destroyed Ryuki, he will again announce his resurrection. So Rinell took the sword and attacked Ryuki. But this attack looked pathetic, so Ryuki didn't even feel it. This angered Rinell even more and he attacked again, ordering his opponent to shut up. Blow after blow was thrown, but Ryuki dodged with ease. He said that Rinell was simply not used to the sword, so all of his attacks are terrible. He definitely handled the spear better. What a pity that he is no longer there. Rinell shouted angrily at how much Ryuki could dodge, but Ryuki hit him with all his might. And then he said that it would be better for Rinell to call his brother for help, and then suddenly remembered that the same one kicked him out. Rinell stared at the guy with red eyes from anger. And then, shouting curses, he rushed to the attack. But each of his attacks flew past Ryuki. Rinell was serious and he was determined to destroy him. And suddenly there was another explosion and Ryuki had to dodge. Rinell immediately realized that this was his chance. Having attacked the guy, he decided not to let him mock him like that anymore. He decided to end the fight, but Rinell's sword blade and Ryuki's short knife crossed. Ryuki said that Rinell went too far. He not only turned the city into a mess, but also attacked innocent citizens. No matter how strong and influential is the boss, it cannot be out of sight. Rinell could not understand what kind of nonsense his opponent was talking about, but suddenly he felt something strange. The space around changed and there were a lot of people around. They all screamed in fear and helped the wounded escape, calling an ambulance. They called doctors and police, but everything around was destroyed. Rinell then realized that Ryuki had blurred his vision, so he didn't notice anything. He shouted, asking when this horror began. But the most dangerous thing was that everyone saw it. People said angrily that after this Rinell would definitely be finished. They began to understand why Rinell had been kicked out. Camera flashes were everywhere. Rinell, in confusion, asked to stop, but no one heard him. Ryuki said from the rubble that Rinell now cannot escape media attention. Angry, Rinell began to swing his sword even more, destroying everything around him. People began to run away in fear, thinking that this madman would attack again. Rinell immediately began to make excuses and say that he only wanted to attack that guy. But in the eyes of the public, it was not he who became the enemy, but only Rinell. And then Ryuki's voice was heard again, who decided to congratulate the enemy. His useless and easy life ended at that moment. Did he still not remember the name of that same no-name? And then memories of how he framed Ryuki popped into Rinell's head. Then he also congratulated Ryuki that his useless life had come to an end. And only at that moment did he remember the name he hated. Ryuki. At this time, all news channels were talking about the unrest in the city. Rinell Darius, who was arrested as a suspect, claimed that it was a conspiracy Ryu-7017. But the police concluded, based on analysis of the data, that this was his solo act. The whereasing of Ryu-7017, who was seen together, remains unclear. But fortunately, there were no deaths. This was all reported to the guild leader, Lindsay, and the conference was mentioned. He was furious and said that this was too much, after which he gave the order to mobilize the entire guild in Lindsay. They will not skimp on any means or methods, even if it paralyzes the entire world of Phantasm. They will find this mysterious no-name no matter what. Gabriel was determined to take control of everything. At the guild press conference, they had already discussed this problem. Gabriel said that before the Rinell incident, Darius was expelled and was not a member of the guild. Therefore, the leader stated that this incident has no connection with the Lindsay Guild at all. Then the reporters asked if it was true that Rinell's account was deleted in the video and why Lindsay's guild attacked Ryudo 17. Gabriel replied that they had investigated the guy. It has the power to forcibly delete data from game mazes, and his power can be used not only in the world of fantasy, but also in other game labyrinths. Based on this, the guild believes that Rudo 17's very existence is a risk factor, and they are using all of the guild's resources to border him. The Lindsay Guild will protect the fantasy world from criminals like RYU 707Vs. At this point, the broadcast was interrupted and the video conference ended. People wrote disappointed comments under the video because the guild did not catch the criminal in a month. Moreover, some believed that this was all due to the exclusion of Rinell, who has a large fan base. People were afraid that now this no-name would run away, but that would be illogical. The reputation of the Lindsay Guild has fallen, which could not help but anger its members. Laguna couldn't believe that her guild was doing nothing. But then her indignation at the video was interrupted by Visk, her friend and another member of the guild. She cleared another dungeon, complaining that the guild gives a lot of tasks. And this whole situation, according to Visk, did not happen because of Rinell, but an increase in the number of closed game mazes. Rinell was just not careful with the misspelling of the name Ryu or whatever his name is. Is there any sense to throwing their entire workforce to catch this guy who is in fact a bug? Suddenly, Laguna exclaimed that this RYU 717 is on another level and his existence challenges common sense. Then Vix calmly asked, "Where is this incredible guy right now?" He fights the guild and forces everyone to chase him, and now he is hiding again, making the guild chase their own tails. So far, he's not doing anything wrong, but Laguna didn't agree with this when suddenly something distracted her. She saw that the same guy had released a new video on the platform. And while everyone was watching this, Gabriel held a meeting with the head of Ratia at their headquarters. The head was clearly unhappy that Lindsay had not caught the intruder. Gabriel apologized, but the head didn't need it, because he even gave the go-ahead to deal with the guy in reality and not in the game. But he still easily fooled the guild around his finger. General Director of Ratia Soft Platinum Rank, Duke Steviro, believed that Gabriel overestimated his capabilities. He heard that their resource extraction in the fantastic world is continually decreasing, so the management was very disappointed with him. This oppression of the old man irritated Gabriel, but he only had the right to apologize. But then Dick added that it would be inconvenient if the world of fantasy crashed right now, until one thing was completed. Dick decided to present the project to Gabriel, a masterpiece that will change the entire gaming industry. Gabriel leaned over and was about to investigate when suddenly he received a notification. It was a notification about the release of a new no-name video. The notification went out to everyone, and people wondered why this guy hadn't escaped yet. It's strange that Lindsay's guild didn't detain him, and he's still freely waving at the screen to say hello to the audience. Ryuki said that he watched the recent video about the Lindsay Guild emergency press conference. The guild leader called Ryuki a public enemy, but he is the enemy of the Phantasm, which will soon fall apart because of him. Today's video is just a preview of his further actions. The Knock Knock Builder game. It was previously popular, but was abandoned due to errors and complexity. This is usually how some game labyrinths end up, but this cannot happen just like that. So when do these labyrinths end? First, when the resources in the game maze are exhausted or are transferred to other mazes. But the world of Phantasm cannot be extended indefinitely, so exhausted labyrinths are turned off. Second, is when the number of users falls. And if the number of players falls below a certain threshold, it will automatically disconnect. This game, where Ryuki is now, was closed just like that. And finally, the third case, a virus. Here it was the Knock Knock Cube God, the entity that creates cubes, and therefore this place became a trash game. But now Ryuki decided to fix this by starting to take out weapons. He will destroy this cube god to restore the game and film it. Visk looked at the monitor screen in delight, not believing what was happening now. Laguna noticed in the guy's hands the weapon that he used in the world of fantasy in the video, how he uses the same weapon in another game. Maze is a mystery because the maze system limits it. However, on the screen, a lot of cubes were already flying at the guy. He easily cut them, moving forward. Cube soldiers are nothing special. There are many, but they are weak and have simple attack patterns. However, the reason why this maze game failed is not this. And the fact is that there were endless attacks that destroyed everything and made construction and craft impossible. This is all because of bad difficulty settings, but it's interesting. What happens if you destroy the root cause of such attacks? That's what Ryuki did, pouncing on the cube and piercing it. This was the ultimate method to end the game because there was a flaw in the system. With him, it is impossible to maintain the game and save the maze. But now Ryuki used the delete and destroyed the system bug. The cube screamed, sparkled, and began to disappear into the space of the game. It soon disintegrated into many small, useless cubes. Now when Ryuki has removed Thump Builder, this game maze will be automatically turned off. Now everything has fallen into place and the cubes have become small. Visk couldn't believe that this guy actually destroyed the game maze himself. Laguna realized that the skill that removed Linful's weapons and avatar can influence the game maze itself. At this time, Ryuki thanked all his viewers from the screen and said goodbye. He wanted to correct the stupid some high-policy person did. To those who claimed that if the world of Phantasm disappears, the world will collapse, but the world will remain. The only thing that will collapse is Radia Soft, saturated with greed and laziness, and Lindsay's guild. And Ryuki is not an enemy of society, but an enemy only of these guys listed above. The video caused a furor, but it was necessary to continue clearing dungeons, and the goal was the Illusion Dungeon. In it, members of Lindsay's guild were looking for Ryuko, whose photo was held by the leader of the team. He pointed to the photo and ordered to go to the dungeon. The guild members were outraged and said that they were already here, suffering every month. Why do they have to suffer just because some guy named Ryuki doesn't like the guild? Discontent grew more and more every day. The captain said that this was an order and ordered everyone to leave their weapons during the search. One of the soldiers began to draw his sword, and with it he changed. The veil began to fall off him, and all the other members of the squad turned in fear in his direction. They recognized 7017, whom they had been looking for all this time, but he only mocked. He decided to try out his new skills to warm up for the dungeon. Therefore, Ryuki easily began to attack his opponents with a new skill. It was the SR Sword Draws LV Dao 1 skill, increasing attack speed by 50%. After several attacks, the guy decided to change weapons. Using the SR skill, Soul Severing Blurry, he attacked again. This is a weapon that destroys souls and destroys several enemies at once. Then another soldier attacked Ryuki from behind. However, the guy sensed his approach and turned around sharply. He attacked the enemy, destroying him with one blow. Everyone around them panicked, because they had not seen such skills in WAP. Moreover, the guy has not been in the world of Phantasm for a long time. A month ago, he left the world for a long time. Now, Lindsay's guild definitely had to intervene, so he came to Game Labyrinth. Ryuki wanted to check if it is really possible to destroy the game maze and acquire new skills and items. So the guy ended up in a labyrinth, Heavenly Dragon Blade Online, produced by Ratia Soft and Genre, Martial Arts. Ryuki destroyed all his opponents and said that he needed new power. This power is needed to defeat Rithia and Lindsay. But defeating the boss turned out to be not so easy. Ryuki lost at this game over and over again. He already thought that constant defeats would not allow him to win. But he was still indignant, which made the final boss, the Sword God, laugh. He called Ryuki quite stubborn but decided to show him all his power. The guy was incredibly angry that he couldn't win. Even if it's the final boss, if it's so difficult, of course nobody will come and the game will quit. It's a dead maze, so there are no strategy guidelines, but there must be a way to win. Then Yuguan appeared and suggested just spinning a random box and using all the collected RP. But Ryuki irritably once again said that this was for skills. And then an interesting idea came into Ryuki's head. The boss laughed, thinking that Ryuki just didn't know when to stop. Isn't it clear that it's pointless to try again and again? But Ryuki said he heard it so many times that he remembered all the cut. It's time for such an old man to start acting, otherwise he's just talking. This greatly angered the boss, who became indignant. How dare some fool who happened to survive insult him? The boss rushed to attack, but Ryuki easily dodged the attack. However, the enemy was fast, and rarely had the guy seen such blows. And then the boss caught up with Ryuki and appeared right behind him. He struck the guy, but he managed to defend himself with his sword. The boss said that Ryuki can't match swords with him. He used the true power of his dragon sword. Then he rushed into the attack, leaving only dust behind him. However, there was an explosion from grenades thrown by Ryuki, which the boss considered cowardly. It's all thanks to those N-rank trinkets. This made the boss more angry, but he couldn't be defeated with these trinkets. Then Ryuki released poison into the air, but the boss was not susceptible to it. However, the guy said that it would work, since it was not poison, and he himself put on a respirator mask. The boss began to smell horribly, and his heightened senses made him cover his nose. It was a gas bomb, but it also couldn't stop the boss. But the guy did not despair, and again, scattered a bunch of grenades. They all exploded at the same time, so a bright light appeared. The boss got angry and used the Heavenly Dragon Blade, Rising Dragon Impeller Blade. But suddenly some force threw him in the other direction. The boss fell, which delighted the system. But the system itself told the master not to hold back. Grenades, stink bombs, flares, and weapons. Even the most powerful boss could not fight against this. Therefore, with the guild members, Ryuki used the Dragon QI skill, which won in Blade Online. It was an SR plus skill, Dragon DI skill, 9GG, which improves physical abilities. And then Ryuki entered the dungeon, saying to say hi to Gabriel. In front of him was a boss monster, the spirit of the Bloody Tree Liganon. He had the SR skill, Ramut Sinfant level 1, and he had the appearance of a shadow dragon. It was a dragon made from shadows. It grows by eating the shadows of other creatures. Despite its appearance, this is a terrible creature. But with it, all other SSRs and SRSs will also become useful and can be used. But it was time to go to the dungeon. Illusion, a forest, saturated with evil, attracting lost souls deeper. For some reason, the system tried to say something, but Ryuki said that he already knew everything. After entering the portal, Ryuki immediately understood why the dungeon was called an illusion. A surprise awaited him there, which he immediately sensed. He already understood what the system wanted to warn him about. However, he still entered the portal and smiled at what was happening. At the entrance stood Gabriel with an entire army of strong guild fighters. The guy grinned and said that he had already fulfilled the conditions and did not enter the game. Then why were they persecuting him? Is this all just the return of the legend, Rinell Darius? Yuguan said that he expected this since Ryuki blatantly appeared on their territory. But it's a little surprising to see such a huge crowd just to catch one master. The guy noticed that there were really more than 1,000 people, and is this really Lindsay's level? But then Rinell handed over some notebook and said that he had a proposal for Ryuki. He grinned and said that good offers don't happen with so many people. But Rinell suddenly invited Ryuki to return to the guild. They would cancel his status as an unknown and, moreover, assign him a gold rank, which is almost impossible to achieve. In the future, they will consider Ryuki as the heir to the Lindsay Guild, which is a very good option. But Ryuki asked in disappointment, are they really offering him to become the leader of the guild when he himself wants to destroy it? His answer should be clear. Let them choke on their gifts. And at that very second, Rinell found himself behind Ryuki with a sword in his hands. He attacked the guy, saying at the same time, does he remember the hospital of the general profile of the saint? Where was his mother? Ryuki wondered how Rinell knew where his mother was. But then he also added that his mother's death was not natural. But Ryuki got angry, repelling the attack, asking if Rinell really thinks he will believe this. But Rinell replied that the guy could check it himself, because he brought evidence. The skills and items that didn't exist in the original game's maze system are quite intriguing. Therefore, Rinell will not fight, but will wait for Ryuki at the top of the tower today. Then, without answering the guy's objections, Rinell flew into the air. To get to the top, he will have to go through all these gamers. At the moment, he declared to all members of the Lindsay Guild that the one who destroys Ryuki, he will make the same offer that he made to this guy before. He thought that no matter how strong Ryuki was, it was impossible for one person to defeat 1,000 opponents. Once they win, they will reveal the secret of his power. But before Rinell had time to fly far, he saw his gamers scattering to the sides. Ryuki seemed to explode the entire battlefield in front of him. He definitely had some kind of secret weapon, but through the explosions he turned to Gabriel. Ryuki asked if he was sure of his idea to leave him here alone, and I myself used the S5R system, a large pistol with a blade for hunting big calls. It was capable of long-distance bombing with energy charging, which mowed down hundreds of players in one hit. But they did not despair, because this is only one player who can be taken in numbers. First, everyone needs to use ranged attacks at the same time. You just need to give him the final blow to become the guild leader later. All the players' powers turned into one big energy ball. Even from afar, his energy felt very powerful. The explosions from the attacks were insanely loud and could be heard everywhere. After them, only clouds of dust remained, and gamers were sure that they had destroyed the target. But when the veil cleared, they saw that there was no one at the scene of the attack. Players assumed that the guy had a return stone and teleported away, but he still couldn't do it that fast, so he had to watch closely. Gabriel, who appeared on the field at that moment, could not believe that this was possible. Ryuki outwitted him this time, but it won't happen again. And Ryuki himself, safe and sound, materialized in another place and said that it was fun. but next time he will destroy Gabriel along with the tower. He already used too many cool skills for this fight and decided to do a spin. He got the skill SSR Limit Break and SSR Enchant of the first level. Ryuki was angry that out of the 1,000 tickets he collected in a month, that was all he got. The system said that the master should already be happy with the fact that he has 2 SR. But what is their plan now? Having calmed down, Ryuki replied that they should now prepare for the tower. It was a high-ranking dungeon where a guy would conquer all the records of conquering the dungeon. Lindsay did not act, which caused indignation among users and delight among fans. Ryuki single-handedly cleared the dungeon. Blue, Underground Labyrinth. It took even the fastest gamer 2 years to reach the tower. This speed was not possible due to alignment restrictions, but a new record was set. This Ryuki simply burst into the game labyrinths and set records there. This time it was the Dawn Mist Prairie dungeon. Viewers began to speculate that Ryuki would be the first to clear the tower after he cleared the Aurora ground. Lindsay's players were following the guy, and RYU 7017E01 was suddenly spotted in a nearby dungeon. Even players of the older generation admired the fact that the young guy closed the mazes so quickly. Even ordinary inhabitants of the labyrinths began to rebel. They didn't want to bow their heads to gamers anymore. They shouted that they were born here and they would die here. They wanted to drive out the invaders from outside and take back their world. They formed the Blood Penetration Unit and proved that they no longer needed gamers. Tomorrow they wanted to attack the dungeon, starting a rebellion. The old innkeeper looked at it all sadly. All the customers had already left and he was about to close the store, advising the last customer to go home. It was Ryuki in disguise, who over the communication asked the mod creator with whom he was in contact if there was any new information. He replied that the rebel unit was created by the inhabitants of the game under the leadership of that guy Coogan. They have already challenged the dungeon several times, but now they are confident that they will conquer it. Yuguan added that this is not just recklessness, it is practically suicide. The villagers here have no system, so they cannot level up, and if they die once, they cannot be resurrected. But Ryuki didn't care until he heard that a certain gas had made contact with the rebels. Asia contacted the game maze NPC, and it's not a bug. Ryuki said that he had a bad feeling about this and disguised himself again, setting off. He was on his way to the dungeon, Predator's Nest. Ryuki was wondering why those guys from Chiofielddan were gathered here. It turns out they had an ace up their sleeve. Yuguan liked what was happening and the system of this game, but Ryuki replied that thanks to this, he was able to sneak in here, disguised as a resident. But it doesn't matter since these people are weaker than gamers. The guy didn't understand how they were planning to fight the huge dungeon monster. A huge scorpion was approaching people, wanting to hit the enemy with its sting. He attacked, scattering a bunch of resistance members. The first wave retreated, so Coogan ordered the second wave to attack. For an NPC, their movements were pretty skilled. But for such monsters, you need to try to attack the gaps in the shell or joints. Otherwise, they cannot be defeated, especially a huge scorpion with powerful armor. Here, Yuguan discovered a pattern identical to the Gay S. Asia dagger. They may be even more trouble than Lindsay's guild. This is not the first time these guys have interfered in their business. At this time, Coogan's army was losing soldiers, asking in panic what they should do. Their comrades were in critical condition. They were destroyed by the scorpion's venom and were hanging on by a thread. Ryuki, watching everything from the shadows, asked Yuguan, "What happens when NPCs die?" He replied that they are absorbed into Yggdrasil and are reborn in another form, like reincarnation. Very rarely, some keep memories of their past life. But before the fight, Coogan gave everyone vials of medicine for the dying, which they needed to drink. After this, the soldier's body began to glow, and his mortal wounds healed. For Ryuki, this potion and the strange weapons of these people were a miracle and aroused suspicion. Their aura seemed ominous, and the guy's intuition did not disappoint. The squad members, seeing how quickly their comrade recovered, were glad that they could do the same. However, Coogan found it suspicious that they got such things from a gamer. But it turned out that they can also be kind, and their motives are obvious. Gamers want to subjugate the residents, but they will not sit and wait while they are used because they are users themselves. But they are not pawns to be used and they will fight. And now they have finally reached the final monster. This was the final boss of this dungeon, which was huge and scary. His name was Abaddon, and he was angry that his soldiers had died. He has the habit of rugging underground, so the commander ordered to attack as much as possible before this happens. But before they had time to attack, the monster suddenly began to sink underground. Ryuki understood that he needed to analyze the enemy's pattern to exhaust it, and he himself would use his intuition. Then he could choose the perfect time to attack, but the guys could only move and not stand still. Once someone falls into the trap, they are definitely finished. Therefore, Coogan decided to attack first, striking the ground with his sword. He missed, but sensed which direction the monster was moving. And suddenly and with a loud roar jumped out of the ground. Realizing that it was all because of Coogan's punch, Ryuki thought it was very cool. But the monster began to surround all the players. He wounded many players with fragments of earth, who decided to immediately use the potion. Coogan shouted that he needed to hold out a little longer because victory was close. The captain did his best putting energy into this blow. Thus, he defeated the enemy, and the inhabitants cleared the dungeon of the dragon's nest. Coogan was happy because they had whitewashed it. A victorious roar rang out among all the remaining residents. But then there was applause and a mocking man emerged from the shadows. He said it was quite cute, which caught Coogan's attention. He recognized the voice as that of John Doe, who couldn't believe the villagers had made it through. John was a player from the outside world who caused a lot of outrage. Although he helped the residents, they could not trust him because he probably also wanted to use them. John just smiled and said that he congratulated these people on clearing the dungeon. This achievement may give the residents of the game's maze a little pride. But, unfortunately, the heroes of this change are not them. Coogan said he doesn't know John's goal, but Chiofieldon is just beginning and they'll be out of here soon. Well, then John grinned and asked if that guy took the black potion. Then he waved his hand, and everyone who drank it fell into convulsions. This potion does not recover people completely, but simply constantly generates error code in the damaged areas. The bug gradually infects the user's body. Their GAES planned this experiment from the very beginning. To see what happens to a person after an injection, a closed space and 50 people are ideal conditions. Coogan, bleeding black liquid, was seething with rage because they were being used again. But John said they were just a few fancy game NPCs. In the last moments, Coogan angrily sent John away, calling him a failure. But he soon fell and John dragged him to the side. He then opened the panel and started calling the players by numbers. It turned out that all the numbers failed and died. It was almost complete destruction, but some people remained. Coogan was heaving heavy sighs at this time. John took off his hat with happiness. Is this really a success and someone survived? But Coogan had already turned completely black, covered in an evil aura. He suddenly began to rise and shouted to the residents to rise up. Black energy accumulated around the guy. It was everywhere, as if flowing from everything around. John looked at this with pleasure because this specimen began to infect the dungeon. Soon the entire dungeon will be subdued, but suddenly Ryuki appeared behind John. He used the skill SR plus Sunbow YGG of an unknown level of the Yuguan system. John turned around in surprise at being called an outsider, but froze as a knife was pointed at him. Ryuki asked once again what Gays were up to, stopping just wagging their tongues? John asked why he had to reveal his plan, but Ryuki asked to explain the mistake. John then decided to reveal that it began as a Yggdrasil data research. It took a long time, but now they've almost reached the end, and now the final test awaits them. They have long noticed that NPS grow like ordinary people. Moreover, they wanted to be residents and someday get into the real world. John felt that this NPS was serious and could be used. It was then that John suggested they work together, and now the shadow of his body fell on Ryuki's shoulders. And John, dodging attacks, was sure that he would soon destroy him. But Ryuki had his own ace up his sleeve. He used a level 2 intuition skill, and then another grenade materialized in his hand. It flew straight towards John, frightening him with its glow. This flash blinded and angered John, and Ryuki grabbed him by the collar and said that he couldn't be fooled by cheap tricks. And then he asked what this terrible thing was that was devouring the dungeon, and what did it do to the Blood Guild? John laughed, asking if Ryuki had a crush on the NPS. But the guy didn't like that John didn't want to talk, so he decided to take action. John fearfully asked what this guy wanted, but he, without listening to the end, hit him on the ground. Because of this, John was unable to log out. He didn't understand why nothing was working, but the darkness was closing in on him. Ryuki said that he blocked the exit from the system and the enemy cannot escape. Therefore, he ordered him to surrender and answer his questions. But John was silent, and Ryuki raised his sword over him, saying that he looked pathetic. But I myself thought that first-level instinct could identify the source and result of this danger. But then the gasping John was able to shout that something had appeared behind Ryuki. The guy turned around and noticed a strange, dark silhouette from behind. He covered Ryuki's head with his huge hand, but this attack could not hit the agile guy. He jumped away from attacks and explosions, dodging them. Ryuki couldn't understand where these attacks were coming from. They were created by the same guy Kugan, but how was he still alive? Suddenly, one of his attacks overtook John. He tried to cover himself with his hand, but the blow penetrated it like a parasite. The hand began to disappear, and John realized that his body had become infected with a bug. As John disappeared, he promised Ryuki that he would pay Rei for ruining his research today. Ryuki realized that John had escaped, and not just like that, but in the same way as he entered the dungeon, that is, not through the system. But now there is only one problem left: the infected monster Kugan. Now all his attention turned to the guy, but he immediately received a blow to the face. Ryuki immediately attacked, and the monster flew to the side. His head felt like it was split in two, but he was still alive. Ryuki couldn't believe it and didn't understand how he could defeat this creature. Its appearance looked stable, but it seems that inside it there are only bugs and errors. But behind all this was a small child, Kugan, who devoted all his time to training. They told him that he was not fast enough and promised to take the boy from the village if he won. But then this fight was noticed by Kugan's mother, who had been looking for her son since the very morning because he needed to chop wood. But Kugan replied that he no longer does that boring housework. These people from outside promised him if he won the bet, they would take him out of this village. But suddenly, a swing of the sword destroyed all the dreams of the little NPS. Apples fell from the hands of the boy's mother because the gamer knocked her out. One of them said that she was just an NPS, and the next dungeon clue should be on her necklace. Kugan, stuttering, asked what these people were doing, but they did not pay attention to the boy. And then they answered, "Does the boy really think that they will take an NPC as dumb as Kugan?" He was just being bait to get this necklace, but the boy didn't understand why he would kill because of this. And he would never have understood, because now he is a slave to the Black Spear, which was in Ryuki's hands, along with the antidote. He got everything necessary for the analysis, and only a small matter remained. It is necessary to deal with Kugan lying on the ground. Ryuki approached this guy and respectfully told him to say his last wish. Kugan said heavily that he would never forgive gamers. The image of his mother, screaming in fear, appeared before the guy's eyes, and the last words were the curse of all players in the outside world. After which, Kugan gathered all his remaining strength and directed the energy towards Ryuki. To Kugan, he was a gamer like everyone else, but Ryuki defended himself. But without knowing this guy Kugan, he came to respect him. His desire to change the world was similar to Ryuki's own, and perhaps they would have gotten along. Anyway, Gaia's will be destroyed soon, so he will talk about revenge. In the meantime, he wished Kugan to be reborn in a kinder labyrinth. It was not possible to record this fight due to an error caused by GAES, which the guy clearly underestimated. Who would thought they would be using the Blood Guild as test subjects? And while Ryuki was thinking about this, the mod creator was looking for information about this John. Ryuki knew that it was time for him to get the Phantasm certificate, although he thought about doing it later. Time to reach the peak of the Demon Tower, the finale of the Phantasm world. Ryuki managed to reach her quickly enough, and this dungeon looked like a city. Members of the Lindsay Guild were there as guards, and one of them was Visk. She was unhappy because she didn't like just sitting instead of climbing the tower. Then the girl next to her said that the probability of Ryu Sefen on 7 becoming a phantasm and appearing in the tower this week is 90%. This girl was a high-ranking member of the Lindsay Guild named Noir. She suggested that Gabriel was nervous after he was found. But Visk asked, "Since when did their guild master start behind so human?" All the information from headquarters is incorrect, and the support is a joke. Noin replied that the Phantasm world is a little unstable right now, but the NPC group, Blood Guild, cleaned the dungeon themselves. And the dungeon completely collapsed because of a bug right after that, and now the players think the NPCs are the cause and haunts them, warning the conflict. In fact, there is evidence that someone interfered with the Blood Guild. But since the data was erased with the dungeon, this could not be confirmed, but the guild is sure that Ryu 7017 is involved in this. This delights many, for example Laguna, for whom the no-name is almost a god. The techniques in his videos are of course impressive, and if only the guild had a player like him, it would be easier. But who entrusted him with such power as deleting data is unclear, but it is very dangerous. But then another strange guy appeared on the horizon. It was another high-level member of Lindsay's guild, Explosive Sword. He patted Visk on the head, asking who let the children into the tower. But Visk answered displeasedly that she was not going to look at his stupid face. Then the guy decided to end their rivalry once and for all. and the one who destroys the no-name is the winner. They had already started shouting at each other, but Noir tried to calm her friends down because they were talking too loudly about confidential information. However, all the guild members were losing patience, wondering how long they should wait for this guy. But suddenly they all received a notification at the same time. It was reported that a new level 47 has been unlocked. But then Visk shouted that it's not about the 47th floor. This notification came to them for a reason. It said that a new record has been set.